Elizabeth lay on her bed, scrolling through her social media feed. She could have been doing something useful, but she was very tired after work. Elizabeth worked as a receptionist in a hotel, spending 12 hours on her feet and constantly dealing with several tasks at the same time. In addition, this job required a lot of socializing with people, and the clients were very different. It was exhausting. I only had enough strength to get home, order food, and fall on the bed. Matthew would be home soon. That's when she'd get up. In the meantime, she could stay on the phone a little longer. Matthew was an unpretentious husband in terms of her household chores. He had never reproached Elizabeth for not cooking dinner or not cleaning the flat. There was a calmness and understanding between the couple. If Matthew was hungry, he either cooked or ordered food. In general, Elizabeth was very lucky to have him, conflict-free and gentle, a faithful homebody. Who would have thought then, when they met, that he would make such a marvelous husband? After all, in his youth, Matthew was a real bully, smoked behind the garages at school, bullied guys, always got into fights and boorish teachers. But he could joke so well that the whole company was laughing. That's what got Elizabeth's attention. Elizabeth considered her school years to be the happiest time of her life. Her parents were still alive. The girl did only what she wanted to do. There were many opportunities and suitors around. A wonderful carefree time. Not like now, when you have to spend most of your life at work. I don't know what it's all for. To earn money, cover household expenses, buy some clothes, delicious food, and earn again. Life flew by so quickly and seemed so meaningless. The woman had a classmate reunion coming up soon. After 10 years, Elizabeth decided to find out how everyone had turned out. Everyone was now 28 years old. Some had married, some had divorced, some had children, some had cars and flats. It was all terribly interesting. Elizabeth hadn't really made friends at school that would carry her relationships through the years, but she socialized with everyone evenly. Their class was surprisingly friendly. They went for walks and to museums together, celebrated holidays together. Elizabeth remembered names and surnames and found their pages. It was easier with men. They don't change their surnames, but former classmates were harder to find. Elizabeth read the posts, looked at the pictures, wondered, and moved on to the next student in her class. How everyone had changed in appearance. I wonder if they would say the same about her. What would she be like in their eyes? What could she tell them anyway? That her studies had gone wrong, dropped out of second-year medical school, went to work in a hotel. She's been working there for 8 years. Well, the pay is good. She rose up the career ladder to the senior shift. She's made friends with the staff. The girls are sure to ask about her husband and children. Elizabeth has never been married. She lives in a civil partnership with Matthew. I wonder if there'll be a class reunion in Matthew's class. I mean, he was in the same class. They had an affair at graduation, but it hasn't really taken off yet. What's that supposed to mean? They've been together for 10 years too. Wow. Elizabeth's mood immediately soured. Someone dates for 6 months and then goes to the registry office, and she hasn't been proposed to in 10 years. Whether it's her or him doesn't change the point. Elizabeth lives in a common law marriage and still doesn't have kids. That's what the girls will be discussing after the meeting. The woman felt uncomfortable. And if, when she came home, was quite satisfied with her life, now she felt like an absolute failure. Sad thoughts about the meaning of her life again seized Elizabeth. But as a child, she had shown great promise. Her studies had been easy. She won Olympiads and competitions, especially in biology. Her parents were sure that their daughter would grow up to become a great doctor, perhaps even invent a cure for incurable diseases. Elizabeth also believed in her exceptional destiny, different from the usual boring life. This is probably what all teenagers believe until they face adult reality. And reality showed that Elizabeth was not so talented. She barely got into college. The scores were exactly the minimum to pass. The girl looked mediocre against her classmates, and she quickly realized that she was not interested in medicine because she was squeamish about other people's bodies and the sick. She studied only to avoid upsetting her parents. When her parents died in a car accident, the first thing Elizabeth did was to abandon her studies to distract herself from the painful experience. She took a 24-hour job at a hotel. Lots of people around, lots of tasks. All this helped her not to think about her life. Matthew took care of the house during this period, even though he was studying economics and combined his studies with a job in a bank. He tried to support his wife. After work, Elizabeth would lie down by the TV, and they would watch films together. They fell asleep on the sofa. In principle, she was happy with her life. She never thought about the fact that she could have had more and better things. Why did she have to go on that social networking site? She'd rather watch something nice on TV. Elizabeth switched off her phone. Then she suddenly remembered that she hadn't found Mary Smith, the only person she'd seen a few times since high school. She knew she was married, had twins, and worked in New York. But what if something had changed with her? She'd have to update her information. Elizabeth switched her phone back on and found her friend's page. The first post was a bouquet of flowers and the caption, "It's always beautiful at work." The second post was pictures of children in the woods by the lake and the caption, "My kittens." But when Elizabeth saw the third post, she thought she was losing her mind. The photo was captioned with the phrase, "Getting ready for the wedding by putting together bespoke wedding bouquets, friends get a discount," and the image showed a happy bride and groom. Except that the groom was her own husband, albeit her common-law husband. Elizabeth enlarged the photo, reduced it, but it did not change the fact that there was Matthew hugging some girl, and her face was suspiciously familiar. What was this all about? Was this a prank? Did Mary know that Elizabeth was living with Matthew? She couldn't remember if she had told her exactly who her common-law husband was. She might not have known, which was why she hadn't told her. But did Matthew himself have no idea that he would be so foolishly caught? Or was he not really hiding? Wasn't he afraid Elizabeth would find out? Why not just break up? Why live with one and prepare to marry the other? What kind of amazing meanness is that? Elizabeth found Mary's number on her phone and dialed her. "Mary, hi. It's Elizabeth, your classmate. Are you busy?" "Oh, hi, how unexpected. No, I was just picking up a bouquet. No other clients yet. Why are you calling?" "I saw a picture of the bride and groom on your page where you offer your services in arranging wedding bouquets. They look familiar. So I thought I'd see who it was." "Oh, that's Matthew from my class. I don't know if you remember him. He's getting married. And guess what? He came into my shop with his fiancée. What a coincidence. I took the order. I'll prepare the bouquet. He didn't even recognize me. Of course, I was gray and glasses at school. Now I weigh 70 kilos, I wear bright lenses and dress brightly too." "Yes, I guess he didn't recognize you," Elizabeth said thoughtfully. "Do you know the bride?" "No, she's not from our school, that's for sure. They work together, I think. That's what I got from the conversation. But she's a beauty. Don't you agree? You can see she's all well-groomed and spends a lot of money on it. Matthew's just a simple, ordinary-looking bloke." "Oh, I see. When's the wedding?" "It's not for another month. They're going on holiday. I also said to put more white flowers in the bouquet because they contrast with the tan skin." "On holiday? Oh, I see. Thank you." "Elizabeth, what's wrong with your voice? Something wrong?" "No, I'm just sad. My husband hasn't been able to take me on holiday for years. He says there's no money." "Oh, don't be sad. Not everyone has such money bags. Oh, I'll run a client's here." So Elizabeth burst into tears at that last sentence. That's the thing, it was Matthew she'd fallen for. She had been with him for 10 years, but he was taking her on holiday and marrying someone else. Her heart was breaking with resentment. Elizabeth realized she just couldn't see her husband now. It is necessary to leave the house before he comes. The woman quickly packed up and went wandering through the evening streets. When the lights were already on in the houses, families gathering together after a day's work. How was it that Elizabeth had wasted her youth on the wrong man? The thoughts choked the woman. She could have had a real family, raised children. Instead, she found herself cheated and betrayed on the cusp of 30 years. The flat they live in, bought together, but registered to Matthew, as is their car. Elizabeth is left without everything. After all, legally she's not even a wife. She has to start from scratch again. And then how can she believe in love again? She has to sort things out with Matthew first, dump on him that she knows everything, pack her things and leave. But she's not ready. She hasn't even got anything saved up or set aside for such an eventuality. And she's the one who loses. Elizabeth gets the housing problems, the heartbreak, the deceit. And Matthew will go on holiday with his new girlfriend and then get married. Where's the justice in that? No, she's not going to let them enjoy life when she's feeling so bad. We have to figure out a way to ruin their lives. First of all, find out the whole truth, all the details, and then devise a plan. When Elizabeth got home, Matthew was already there, frying something in the kitchen for dinner, acting completely normal. Naturally, there was no way to guess that he might have a mistress. He always came home from work on time, did not hide his phone, but immediately put it on the table. After dinner, he usually sat down to play a console or read fiction books. His demeanor was that of an ordinary homebody. Elizabeth went into the kitchen, sat down at the table, and scrutinized her husband, trying to understand how it was possible that he had another fiancée. "Matthew, do you love me?" she asked, not taking her eyes off her husband. "Of course I do, sweetheart. What's the sweet question all of a sudden?" "I was just wondering why you never married me." "I didn't know it was important to you." Matthew hesitated at the cooker. "It never even crossed my mind. In 10 years, it never occurred to you to propose to me." "What are you doing? Picking a fight? We have a good life. Why do we have to be so formal? What's wrong with you?" "Everything is fine," Elizabeth sneered and stopped talking. "Okay, honey, I'm going to take a shower and then we'll have dinner. I got all sweaty while I was cooking," Matthew said as he set the food down and poured the coffee. He left the kitchen and left his phone on the table. Elizabeth never took her husband's mobile phone. It was the way she'd been brought up. You can't touch someone else's. She told Matthew that when he'd grabbed her purse one day to find her headache pills, but now the woman was ready to break her principle. The phone didn't even have a password, so sure was Matthew of the inviolability of his mobile phone. Elizabeth opened the messenger, and the first thing she saw was a correspondence with Emily, private conversations, emoticons, hearts, kisses, and declarations of love. The story of her husband's relationship with another woman loomed in front of a stunned Elizabeth. Suddenly, the water in the bathroom turned off. Elizabeth quickly downloaded her rival's number and returned the phone to its place. She herself walked out of the kitchen and lay on the bed, turning her back to the wall. Let her husband think she had fallen asleep. Matthew peeked in the bedroom for fresh laundry, was surprised to see Elizabeth asleep, and went to dinner. Alone? The woman in the meantime downloaded a special application. You enter a phone number, and you get all the pages in the social networks of this person. In 5 minutes, Elizabeth knew everything about Emily, what she looked like, what kind of music she listened to, who were her friends, and who did she work for. She turned out to be a colleague of Matthew's, an employee of the same bank. Outwardly quite pretty, but with silicone-powdered lips and cheekbones tightened by a beautician. A doll. Elizabeth thought squeamishly of her rival. Did Amy know Matthew was living with someone else? Surely she must know. Colleagues would have told her. Elizabeth had gone to a corporate party with Matthew once, but it had been terribly boring. She drank a lot. She went outside to get some air and left without waiting for her husband. She never went with him again, but at least the staff knew Matthew was married. Where did she come from? How long had they been having an affair? Why wouldn't Matthew break up with me? Amy had a picture on her page on her hand, close up, a beautiful engagement ring. Everyone is congratulating her in the comments, and she replies that she's going dress shopping at Ocean next week. The groom will be shopping. Elizabeth almost drops the phone. The Ocean. That's the most expensive wedding dress boutique in their town. Where did he get the money from, she thought. But why does she only hear from him rejections in the phrase, no money? She wanted to go to Turkey, no money. She wanted to buy a designer dress for the New Year's corporate party, no money either. Even when she raised the issue of buying a flat, Matthew said that there was no money yet. And when Elizabeth hustled and found money for a down payment for a mortgage, which was made out to Matthew, and apparently he didn't have the money just for her, but he had it for the other one. What an arsehole and a bastard he was. All the situations when Elizabeth had tried to bring their family to the next level came to mind. For example, there was the story of the flat. They had been living in rented accommodation for several years with all the attendant inconveniences. A landlord who sets his own rules. It's impossible to make repairs to their liking to have a dog or cat. There was also the constant fear of being told to move out at any moment. Elizabeth several times started a conversation with Matthew about her housing, but he was categorically against the mortgage. And then the woman had to solve everything herself to find the money for the down payment, and then put pressure on her husband to draw up the documents. And as a result, they lived beautifully in their own spacious flat. She had done so much for their family. She'd given Matthew all her time, her youth, her love over the years. If she could know the future, she would never live with that low man. How hurt by the betrayal and how bitterly disappointed Elizabeth was now. For days she pretended everything was normal while she gathered information. Amy posted a photo from a wedding boutique with the caption, "And what kind of dress I chose, see in a month." Matthew was next to her in the photo. Elizabeth was shaking from the fact that they weren't even hiding. She wanted to get the couple out in the open, but she had to find out if Amy knew that Matthew wasn't single. To do that, the woman went to the bank office. Emily was sitting at the customer service table. Elizabeth knew her immediately. She had studied her paragraphs too thoroughly. In person, she looked even more like a silicone doll. "Hi, I'm Emily. How can I help you?" "I'm looking for your employee, Matthew Piet." "Is something wrong? If you have any questions about his work, can we refer you to the quality department?" "No, there's nothing wrong. It's just that he's my husband." Elizabeth watched Emily's reaction carefully. Her eyebrows rose slightly in surprise, but there was a sarcastic smile on her lips that told Elizabeth everything. She knew Matthew was married. "Just a moment, please wait, I'll invite him in," Emily said. As Emily dialed the employee's number, Elizabeth caught the mocking looks of the female employees. Obviously, she'd given them a good topic for gossip. It was clear. The whole office knew about this love triangle. Everyone except the wife herself. How vulgar and low. Elizabeth turned and walked outside, unable to stand the leering stares. Matthew came out to her an hour later and said in a calm tone, "Oh, what a surprise. Are you here? What brings you here? How fortunate. Let's go to lunch together then." Elizabeth walked beside her husband and was amazed. They were two different people. When will he tell her? I wondered. The day before the wedding. Or will he marry and continue to live with her? Or would she just see her things on the doorstep one day and Emily running her house? She shook with indignation. Elizabeth hid her emotions well, for not a single muscle in her face flinched. Matthew didn't even sense that anything was wrong. They walked into the cafe and took a table by the window. When they had both ordered, Elizabeth struck up a conversation. "Matthew, I'm going on holiday in a month. Why don't we take a holiday after all? Go away together?" "No, I don't think so." "Why not? Aren't you supposed to be on holiday?" "That's right, but it was canceled. Instead of a holiday, I'm going on a business trip to another city. They're opening new offices there. I have to train the new recruits, get them up to speed. And I have a lot of experience, so they're sending me on a business trip instead of a holiday." "And you didn't resent it, Matthew?" "What can you do, Elizabeth? Work is work. Let's just drop it. You'll give up the business trip and we'll go on holiday, like I've always dreamed of, to some hot country. Spend the weeks together, saying still we there. Please, Matthew, let's do it." "No, Elizabeth, we can't. I've already agreed. There's no one else to send, and the ticket's in my name. And you know how expensive it is to fly to another country. Where are we going to get the money for them? I'm very limited, otherwise I'd have taken you a long time ago. By the way, can you pay for our lunch? I left some money at work." Trini has no conscience at all, as Elizabeth thought, but she said nothing more. She quickly packed up her lunch and went home. Apparently it was time to pack her things, but first she wanted to devise a plan of revenge. Obviously, you can't make nice by force, and Elizabeth had no illusions about winning back Matthew's love, but she would not let it go. If only they'd treat her humanly, confess, explain, apologize finally, but to lie to the last one like this right in the eye, that deserved to be treated accordingly. Elizabeth remembered how scornful and mocking Emily had looked at her. That wretch had stolen someone else's husband and was happy. Elizabeth's plan was simple. She would walk briskly up to her and pull out her braids. For the woman had heard how expensive and time-consuming hair extensions were, and how easily they could be ripped out. The bruises take a long time to heal too, and if one taps the top point of the bridge of her nose, the circles around her eyes will darken. Let her be battered and battered in her holiday photos, just as she deserved to be. Elizabeth couldn't accept that Matthew's mistress was so much prettier than she was. It was as if the infidelity was hurting the woman's self-esteem even more. She hated Matthew, but she also depended on him. After all, she needed to peacefully retrieve her things. And if she could, demand from him the money she paid for the down payment back then. So harming him and taking revenge was impossible right now. But Elizabeth could repay the vile rival, who not only danced on another's grief, but also laughed at the wife who had been deceived for so long. For this there is no forgiveness or excuse. One should remain a human being in any situation. Certainly, the travesties in the direction of the mistress will not help to survive the pain and betrayal. But Elizabeth, at least for a little bit, will feel that she was able to stand up for herself and will stop being such a wimp, which wiped their feet. And the only thing left to figure out is how to stalk Emily without anyone interfering and stopping Elizabeth. But calling her for meetings isn't going to work. It's hard to come up with a plausible excuse, and she'll quickly realize that Elizabeth is now aware of their affair. They're always busy at work. But what if we could do something to keep people away for a while? Like fake a fire, create smoke. Alarms would go off, and then evacuate. Okay, stop. But then how do we make sure she stays in the building? So wait for her to go to the bathroom and lock her in there. Bingo. Everyone will be gone. Elizabeth figures out her relationship with the snake. Then she'll leave and forget about her and Matthew like a bad dream. So the woman went ahead with her plan and went to the builder's shop first. Good afternoon. I need strong magnetic blocks. The thing is that my dacha door is locked on a metal latch, but it is always open from the wind. I want to lock it from the backside, Elizabeth said. Yes, of course. Anything else you'd like? A smoke bomb. What? The salesman asked in surprise. The moles are bothering me. Elizabeth smiled. Would a smoke bomb help to get them out? Oh yes, and the strongest Scotch tape, please. Why Elizabeth had bought Scotch tape, she didn't know. She had fantasies of being bound and gagged. The woman felt like a heroine of the adventure series she loved to watch so much. In them, good always defeated evil, and the victim triumphed over the oppressors in the finale. That's what Elizabeth wanted, a just retribution. Besides the feeling of vengeance, she also wanted to see the remorse on the faces of the traitors. Elizabeth left the shop with a satisfied smile and the purchases that would bring her plan to fruition. The woman had been waiting for over a week. She wanted to get everything done on the last day before her holiday so this girl wouldn't have time to get her new hair done in time for her trip. Studying Emily's page these days, Elizabeth had even learned that the bride and groom were going to Miami for a fortnight. She thought for a moment that this was all being done to spite her. After all, Matthew was fulfilling for the other everything Elizabeth had dreamed of: the wedding, the dress, the holiday in a hot country. Why didn't they choose something else for the holiday? Apparently her husband wanted to hurt her more. And then these days, Matthew suddenly made her a strange proposal. Elizabeth had been thinking of renovating her flat. I've already found a contractor and arranged to start the day after tomorrow. I'll be away on business and I'll get you a place to stay. Wait, Matthew, are you trying to move me out? No, I'm just trying to make our home more cozy. You wouldn't like living in a renovation. There's dust and dirt and workers here all the time. And in a rented place you won't be disturbed. I've got some boxes. Let's get our things together. It became clear to Elizabeth that Matthew had decided to evict her without any arguments and conflicts, to go on holiday with his mistress, and then to change the locks and confront his ex-wife with the fact. She thought about confronting him right now, telling him to his face, but decided to be wiser. First she would deal with his mistress, and then she would come to the flat in their absence and arrange such a repair that it would cost him a lot of money in the real one. Aloud, however, she just nodded and started packing. She noticed that Matthew had started to put his things in cupboards and hers in boxes. Tears choked the woman, but she couldn't cry in front of him. In the evening, Matthew moved the packed boxes to the rented flat, put them all out of the car, and got ready to leave. Where are you going? Are you leaving me here? Elizabeth asked. I thought it would be more convenient for you to get to work from home, where all your stuff is. If you need anything, it's all close at hand. Are you kidding me now? Yeah, all my stuff is in boxes. Even if I needed something, it would take me a year to find it. We've always slept together. Did you decide to be alone tonight? Elizabeth asked. Elizabeth, I can't stay here. I haven't got everything ready for my business trip, and I have to get the flat ready and hand it over to the repairman. Anyway, I'm off. You get settled in. Kisses, Matthew replied. Elizabeth waited until the door slammed shut and burst into tears. She'd been crying so much the last few days that she didn't understand why she couldn't stop crying. Maybe she wasn't the perfect wife, but did she deserve to be thrown out like this without explanation or honest conversation? Or was Matthew afraid she'd make a scene and demand a division of property, so he decided to keep things quiet? Well, he miscalculated. There will be a scandal, and a big one. His lady will be out of her hair tomorrow, and Elizabeth's flat would be so trashed that no amount of renovation would help. With a familiar movement of her hand, Elizabeth went to the page and saw a picture of her own flat. Emily was lying on the couch Elizabeth had bought, smiling and holding a glass. At the top was the caption, "Happy housewarming to me." You bastard, Elizabeth thought, and a flame of hatred ignited in her soul. The woman went to bed in the cold, uncomfortable bed of a strange flat. All her tears had already dried. She was in a hurry for the day of vengeance to come. She was never able to sleep. Until dawn, she replayed her revenge plan in her head. Then she remembered her life with Matthew, imagined how happy he was with someone else, tortured herself with these fantasies and suffered. The bank was crowded this morning. Usually everyone planned to do business in the morning. That was what Elizabeth had hoped for, that she could get lost among the customers and keep an eye on Emily. Finally, the woman noticed Emily tapping her colleague on the shoulder, whispered something, and walked out from behind the counter. Elizabeth followed her rival. She was dressed stunningly today, which the cheating wife noted with hatred. On high heels and in a small black elegant dress, she attracted the eyes of all the men in the room. Finally, opening the magnetic door with the employee's card, Emily left the common area. Elizabeth inserted her finger at the last minute, preventing the door from slamming shut. Emily didn't notice that someone was following her. She stepped into the toilet cubicle and closed the lock. Elizabeth immediately installed a powerful magnetic blocker. Emily was trapped. The vigilante looked out into the corridor, threw a smoke bomb at its center, which was already working. A couple more minutes and the sirens would go off. The evacuation would begin. And so it did. Elizabeth heard a commotion in the main hall, and with it the sound of banging. Emily was pounding and yanking on the bathroom door, startled by the siren and not realizing what was happening. Elizabeth waited until the smoke from the checker had cleared, and the voices in the service hall had subsided. But somehow the smoke didn't disappear. It seemed to even increase and fill the room. This can't be. The checker had burned through and shouldn't smoke anymore. Elizabeth walked over and opened the magnetic door, pushing the button, and immediately slammed it shut because flames erupted in her face. A real fire. Elizabeth started thrashing around the bathroom. The whole thing is that while the woman was holding back her rival, by a ridiculous accident, the paper in the wastebasket caught fire. She was standing next to a computer block which overheated. So the paper caught fire, but nobody noticed it because the smoke bomb caused a siren and fuss, and the real fire was not stopped and extinguished in time. One glass of water would have been enough to prevent the tragedy that was about to happen. But there was no one to pour that glass then, and everyone evacuated at the alarm. Elizabeth ran into the bathroom and removed the locking mechanism from the door, which was shaken by the impact. Emily flew outside and fearfully started looking around. She saw Elizabeth and screamed. "What's going on?" "We're on fire," Elizabeth replied. "I'll tell you now, bitch, what's going on." Elizabeth remembered why she was even here. Elizabeth clutched at Emily's hair. "Let go, you crazy woman." "Are you out of your mind?" Emily screamed and started fighting back with her arms and legs. "I'm not, but you're about to be fine. You took someone else's husband, flat, holiday, wedding, and life. I'm going to do more than just pull your hair out." With these words, Emily tried to throw Elizabeth to the floor, but she dodged, pushed her in the chest, ran to the exit, opened the door, but immediately coughed from the smoke in her face and closed the door again. "Well, there's a fire out there. We have to get out or we're going to die," Emily said. "Die, you bitch," Elizabeth screamed, letting out all the pain and rage she had built up. "Why do you hate me so much?" "It's Matthew's decision. He chose the woman he chose. If he loved you, would he have gone out with me? You could have been honest with me, but you're a treacherous bitch." You looked me in the eye and laughed. At me, thinking I didn't know anything. "Matthew should have told you everything. I don't owe you anything. You're nothing to me." "I'll show you nothing." And Elizabeth lunged at Emily again, and they rolled on the floor, hitting each other with a la. Both began to gasp for air as the air in the lavatory became more and more scarce. Finally, their tangle disintegrated. Emily jumped up, ripped off her dress, and started plugging the gaps in the door. Elizabeth's strength was only enough to stare at Emily and be angry at the sight of her beautiful figure without her dress. That beauty became even more obvious. "Why are you lying there? Do you want to die right here?" Elizabeth shouted, trying to open the bathroom window. "Help me." Elizabeth slowly stood up and walked to the window. If they don't make themselves known now, their salvation is nil. No one knows about the women locked in the toilet. All the other visitors evacuated before the real fire started. The window in the loo was never opened. It was ventilated by special systems. There was no need for air from the street, so it was very difficult to board up the window. The two women piled on as hard as they could. The window opened so suddenly that Elizabeth would have fallen out if Emily hadn't grabbed her. But as soon as Elizabeth regained her balance, she pulled her arm out and pushed her rival away. Both women started screaming out the window and calling for help. But the people on the street didn't even look in that direction. The siren was drowning out all sound. "We need to get some attention," Emily said, and ran to the booths. She came back carrying rolls of toilet paper. Elizabeth quickly realized the idea and began to help throw the rolls down. One of the passers-by almost came under this fire. He looked up and saw two screaming women. He immediately ran up to the crowd and pointed them to this window. The fire service was still on its way, so the women just had to be patient and wait. "I'm sorry," Emily said, crying, "I don't want to die with guilt. I didn't like Matthew being married, but he said, 'Don't think about it. It's not your problem. Our marriage died a long time ago.' Yeah, except he forgot to support me." "Elizabeth, didn't you realize it was over between you two a long time ago?" "Why should I? We lived together and hardly ever quarreled. Everything was fine until you came along." Emily looked at Elizabeth in surprise. "Do you think it's normal for a wife to cheat on her husband? You think it's called we were fine?" Elizabeth felt a twinge. That truth made her remember that night, the corporate party with Matthew. She'd been incredibly bored. Everyone was talking about their professional topics, discussing fines and incentives. It was all about work and work and work. All they could do was enjoy the free drinks and snacks and dream about when they could go home. The heeled sandals rubbed terribly, and the gold dress was so tight that it was uncomfortable to move. So Elizabeth mostly sat as her husband's trophy, because he would periodically bring one or another colleague to introduce himself to her. You could see in Matthew's face how much he admired his wife's beauty, how pleased he was that others were noticing that beauty as well. "Matthew, why don't we go home?" Elizabeth asked. "Yes, darling. We can be on our way in 15 minutes. Our boss is about to make a toast, and we can leave discreetly afterwards," Matthew replied. "Aren't you thirsty enough? You can hardly walk." "I can hardly walk because these sandals are chafing." "But they're so pretty they look just like you," Matthew smiled. "All right, listen to your boss. I'm going to get some fresh air." Elizabeth stood up and staggered slightly, walking towards the exit. Instead of the lift, she took the stairs. The drink and uncomfortable shoes caused Elizabeth to stumble at one point, and probably would have fallen had she not been supported by a man walking towards her. Elizabeth mumbled a thank you. She looked up at the man whose hands were still holding her waist. Suddenly, out of the blue, she kissed him. The man returned the kiss, gripped her waist even tighter, then began to run his hands under her dress, pulling it up. Elizabeth didn't resist but gave in to the sudden impulse and gave herself to the stranger right there on the stairs. When it was over, the man zipped up his fly, winked at her, and walked quietly upstairs, where the sounds of the party were still echoing. And Elizabeth, after adjusting her dress, went down to the street, got a taxi and went home alone. She had never discussed the situation with anyone and didn't even know if her husband knew what had happened. Judging by the fact that Matthew had never asked about it, Elizabeth had decided to pretend to herself that it had never happened. She succeeded well, because she did not remember the situation even when she drank heavily again, but already at her corporate party in the hotel. The situation was almost identical, except that this time the betrayal took place in the hotel room, where she went up with a colleague also quickly, without unnecessary emotions and sentiments. Everything ended just as easily. She had forgotten about the situation again and would not have remembered it had it not been for Emily's accusations, which had stirred up a sludge in the pool of Elizabeth's memory. The woman faded her gaze. Then she looked at Emily and asked rudely, "How do you know?" "Are you joking?" Emily was surprised again. The whole office knew about it at the corporate party. The man you slept with was a terrible bully and a pain in the arse, but he was also a senior administrator. He came into the party and cheerfully talked about his lucky encounter on the stairs, not forgetting to mention how comfortable he was in his little gold dress. Everyone realized at once who he'd slept with. Only you weren't in the audience. You were the only one in gold that day. Matthew was scary to look at. It was like he died on the spot. He was so pale. No one even bothered to tease him. Matthew quickly left the office, and the next day, the gossip and banter started. "To be honest, I was pretty sure he broke up with you that night. Did you really think no one knew?" "Yes, I thought so," Elizabeth said, dumbfounded. "He said nothing to me that night or afterwards." "Then he was either a masochist or he loved you too much. Because only a lazy man hasn't gone on about his wife's infidelity. Jokes about horns, cheating wives. Jokes about cheating had been going round the office for years, and they were always made in Matthew's presence. He didn't laugh, but he didn't stop it either, so no one could understand what was going on in his heart. Everyone was sure you were divorced, but it was inappropriate to ask directly. But then one day you showed up at the office. The day you took out the mortgage, remember? That's when they started calling Matthew not just cuckold, but worse." "Yes, I remember that day. I'm surprised you followed Matthew's life so closely to remember all that." "Yeah, because I felt sorry for him. And then I realized that I also really liked him. But Matthew didn't pay attention to any of the women in the office." "For the time being, I guess," Elizabeth quipped. "Yes, after your mortgage, he was changed. That's when he finally noticed me. We started having lunch together and talking. At first we were friends and just chatted, and then it became more than that." "I don't want to hear it." "What? The truth hurts. You just admitted that you spent years preparing to seduce my husband and eventually win him over. So you're even more guilty than I thought." "You're twisting my words. Yes, I liked him, but Matthew was faithful to you and loved you to the last straw of his patience. And you know what that last straw was. Guess what?" "What was it?" "That you powdered your lips and cheekbones and he couldn't resist." "No, it was your theft and machinations." Elizabeth twitched again. How did she know everything? Had Matthew told her about everything? Then why hadn't she gone to the police? Had kept quiet about everything? It was never supposed to come out anywhere, ever. It all started when she started talking to Matthew about getting her own place. But her husband didn't even bother to look into it. He just shut the conversation down with the phrase, "No money." And Elizabeth realized that if she didn't take matters into her own hands, nothing would be solved. She looked up mortgage rates. She found out the nuances. And once again, she confronted her husband with a question. "Matthew, let's buy our own place." To which he replied, "Elizabeth, my salary is barely enough to cover our needs. You can't get a mortgage without a down payment. That's a lot of money." "Well, let's use your position as a bank employee. Think about it and come up with something. Let them give you under special conditions." "No, Lisa, I won't do it. Do you want me to get fired or worse, go to jail?" "No, I want my own place. I'm sick of living in rented flats." "We can't afford it now. Maybe later, I don't know. Stop nagging me about this. I refuse to discuss it anymore." Elizabeth really didn't bring it up again. And Matthew was beginning to think she'd accepted their situation. He himself had been thinking about options for the future, But for now, he could only save little by little for a later installment. But it turned out that Elizabeth wouldn't give up on any of her ideas. She'd latched onto this one like a pit bull, waiting for the right moment to make her move. And one day it came. Elise was on hotel duty alone at the time. Her partner was sick, and 2 of the maids had recently been laid off, so she was working for 4 of them, doing things that weren't even her own. She was standing behind the counter when she saw a prostitute coming out of the lift. There was no doubt that it was her, the provocative attire, the risky behavior. Besides, yesterday she had been led under the arm of a fat rich man who had taken up residence on their 7th floor. The red-haired girl, 6 feet tall with a big ass and ample breasts, didn't even look at the receptionist as woman. No big deal. Elizabeth had seen a lot of situations like this in her job. The man decided to relax and rented a girl for the night. Prostitutes always annoyed the woman, because for a couple of hours they had the amount that Elizabeth received for a 12-hour shift. So much for the great wisdom of spreading your legs. That's what she thought when she saw another butterfly of the night. The call girl left the lobby and Elizabeth decided to go upstairs and offer to clean the room for the adult entertainment lover. The lift took a very long time to come down. Elizabeth's irritation peaked. She screamed and walked to the 7th floor. There she took a breath, put on a duty smile, and walked up to the suite. The door was open. The rich man was sleeping so soundly that he didn't wake up from his own snoring, which made every fold of his flabby body shake in unison with his breathing. Elizabeth was about to leave, having hung up the Do Not Disturb sign, when her eyes caught sight of a table with a stack of notes on it. Elizabeth had never held so much money in her hands before. She slowly walked over and picked up one stack, weighing it in the palm of her hand. It felt good to hold such a sum. Elizabeth returned the money to its place with regret. Sighing, she headed for the exit. Suddenly something came over her. A haunting thought of her flat flashed through her mind. This money would definitely be enough for a down payment. Elizabeth quickly went to the table, grabbed everything, and left the room with the money. After stashing the notes in the back office, she began to think of all the ways they could get to her. The man would wake up soon, find it missing, and the first thing he'd do would be to go to the front desk. There are cameras all over the hotel, so he's bound to ask for video from their floor to find the thief. So I'll have to delete the video from the archive where I go in, and keep it only until the hooker leaves. From then on, I want an empty corridor until lunchtime. But who can help me with that? Elizabeth called Matthew and asked him to come over right away. Her husband didn't know what had happened, but he was very worried. It was the first time she had ever asked him to come to her work. Matthew flew even through a red light and whirled into the hotel lobby. Elizabeth was alive, healthy, even as if happy. Matthew slowed down, puzzled, and approached his wife more slowly. "What's wrong? You rang. I was really scared for you." "Shh, honey, all our problems are solved," Elizabeth said solemnly. "What? What problems? What do you mean?" "We can take out a mortgage now. I have $1 million for a down payment." Elizabeth was smiling. How was Matthew shocked? No ideas popped into his head. Where could she get that much money? "I'll tell you all about it now, but I need your little help." Elizabeth then told him everything, quickly recounting the events of an hour ago. The more Matthew listened, the more shocked he looked. Finally, he said, "And what do you want me to do?" "For you to help edit the footage from the cameras. You used to be into video editing, so you'll figure it out. Don't worry," Elizabeth said lightly. "You think I'm worried about that?" "Yes, I have 100 reasons to worry. From the fact that my wife is a thief to the fact that she and now me, as an accomplice, could go to jail. What were you thinking about?" "About us. About our house. Stop pretending to be so white and fluffy. At least I'm doing something for us, not just saying there's no money. You're the one who pushed me into stealing by your inability to make money, to provide for your family. So you can't just leave me to deal with this situation on my own. I'm not a part of this. Elizabeth, I'm going to work. Go get every penny back before your client wakes up. I'm out of here." Elizabeth couldn't believe that her husband had been so mean to drive off and leave her with this problem. Return the money. How could she not? It was her money, she deserved it. How is she any worse than anyone else for not being able to have a simple house of her own? Elizabeth decided to sort it all out herself. She called their former system administrator. It's a good thing he still had a contact. Ben, hi. It's Elizabeth, the administrator, remember? I really need your help. Yeah, I remember. But I don't work here anymore, so I can't help you. Ben, wait. It's just that you brought in a guy who doesn't know anything, doesn't understand anything. It's an emergency. Remember Anne the maid? She slept with a customer in the corridor outside her room. Now the client's wife shows up and demands the security footage. Says her husband cheated on her while she was out jogging. And she wants proof. And I want to keep this case quiet. Is there any way to delete a specific period of time from the video history? Oh, what floor camera is she asking for video from? From the 7th floor and the lift. I don't know if I'm going to disappoint you or delight you. We don't have a camera on the 7th floor. It's a prop. When I installed the cameras in the hotel, I ordered 9 of them, but 2 of them didn't work. I had to make a temporary solution. I put only the camera housings on the 7th and 8th floors and installed the working ones. But then this layoff happened, and I completely forgot to pass on the information about the cameras. My mistake, and everything in the lift is working fine. Oh, good. Thanks, Ben. We'll be sure to replace the cameras, Elizabeth said. She hung up the phone and could hardly contain her joy. She wouldn't even have to do anything. How fortunate it was that there was no lift and she had walked. Now the lift cameras captured only a woman of easy behavior walking away from a customer. Don't all these lucky coincidences for Elizabeth mean that she is being taken care of from above? That it is fate's will that the money falls into her hands? Silly Matthew, he'll thank me for it. He pretends to be honorable. He'll be a loser without me, she thought. Elizabeth worked her shift and was at Matthew's bank by 4. His colleagues called him in, telling him with a chuckle that his wife had come to see him. "What are you doing here?" he asked. "I brought the down payment for our mortgage," smiling wryly. The wife replied. "No, I'm against all that. Matthew, calm down. It's all sorted out and no one will find out. Let's not make a scene. Come on, we need your signatures. I've already started the paperwork and the deposit. Come on." Matthew obeyed his wife again, but this time he felt something new. It was a heavy feeling. Sometimes people do things that are incompatible with love. For someone, such a deed becomes treason. For someone, physical violence. For someone, verbal humiliation. But after such an act, a person realizes that he does not love anymore. Treason did not become for Matthew this point of unlove. He felt terribly bad, but he still realized that he was not ready to give up Elizabeth. This theft, on the other hand, had become. Matthew signed the documents automatically because all his attention was directed inside himself. And there the man no longer found love for his wife, but found the joy of release. Elizabeth was called into work at 6. She'd just finished the mortgage. There was a scandal at the hotel. A VIP client's money had been stolen. But the worst part was that the cameras on the floor didn't work. Everyone was being interviewed. Elizabeth as receptionist first and foremost. The woman, blinking her big honest eyes, told how in the morning she had seen a girl of easy behavior running away and looking back. There had been no other visitors since morning. Everything agreed that the woman was the thief. The rich client stood at the reception desk and listened to all the evidence. Finally, he interrupted. "Okay, I get it. I hope this stays between us and doesn't go public. There's no need for the police. It'll ruin your reputation and mine. I'll find this girl myself and deal with her quietly. This isn't the 90s, but I won't be fooled. You keep your mouth shut, then it's my business. Your hotel will be no problem. Do we have a deal?" Everyone here nodded, and the matter was really forgotten. Elizabeth also worked as a receptionist, but she had ordered that the cameras on the 7th and 8th floors be replaced. She and Matthew had bought the flat with a mortgage. The payment was small, so it would be paid off quickly. On the day of the deal, Elizabeth was in a hurry. She had to get her things into her new place and run to her shift. Matthew gave her a lift to the hotel. Only when she took a seat at the counter could she catch her breath. "You look exhausted," her partner remarked. "Yeah, I've been on my feet all day. Bought our own flat today. Can you believe it? We just had time to move our stuff in. I'm so excited to finally have a place of my own. How are you doing?" "I'm fine. I just had a fight with my husband this morning. We've been ignoring each other all day. By the way, did you hear the terrible news?" "No, what is it?" "A girl was found dead in a manhole near the hotel. When I saw the picture, I was shocked. I know her. She gets a lot of calls from our clients. The redhead Jenny, remember? She's got a very distinctive look about her." I remember. Elizabeth dismissed her, So what? I feel sorry for her and I'm scared. Maybe it's a maniac in our neighborhood. How can I walk alone now?" "Make up with your husband. And don't go out alone." Elizabeth laughed and went back to work. But the news didn't leave her mind. Elizabeth suddenly wondered if it was the same prostitute who had been accused of stealing the other day. But the woman dismissed the thought, so as not to think about it further. You could start blaming yourself. And Elizabeth didn't like that. She believed that guilt destroyed a person, so it was better to avoid it. "How do you know about the theft?" asked an exasperated Elizabeth to Emily. "Did Matthew tell you?" "Surely it may not occur to you that he feels very badly about it. Thinks he's complicit because he took out a mortgage using stolen money." "Exactly. If it wasn't for me, he wouldn't have taken it. And now you're like rats. You've slowly outlived me so you can live in my house. And I risked so much to get it. We're not going to live there." "What do you mean? What about your post?" "I wrote about the housewarming to tease you. I knew you were following my page. So Matthew does have a conscience. He's going to give it back to me. What was the whole renovation and eviction game for? Matthew already paid off the mortgage on that flat." "What? Is he out of his mind? What do you mean he gave it back?" "Elizabeth, are you out of your mind? Do you think we want to live in fear of your theft being discovered? They'll ask for your bail back, and they'll put Matthew in jail. I told you straight away we weren't going to live there after the wedding. I also offered to pay the police back the whole deposit and let them handle it, but Matthew refused. He still feels sorry for you. I can't believe what I'm hearing. You wouldn't let me live there and you wouldn't let me. What kind of a dog in the hay is that?" "You'll never understand, I guess," Emily sighed. They huddled even closer to the edge of the window, the toilet already filled with smoke. The wet rag under the door wasn't saving them. The door itself became hot, and that's when the women got really scared. Help might not get to them in time. It was a good distraction from the nightmare that was happening. But when all the words were gone, all that remained was the fear of burning alive. "We should go out on the ledge," Emily said firmly. "It's our only chance to stall for time." "Are you crazy? No way. I still want to live." "If you want to live, then listen to me. The fire's coming. We have to get out of here before we pass out from the fumes." "But we're going down," Elizabeth panicked. "So they'll hold on to each other. Come on, let's go." Emily took off her shoes and boldly threw her foot over the windowsill. "Barefoot will have a better grip on the metal ledge," she said, and stood on the ledge at the back of the window, slowly straightening her legs and rising. "Come on, come here. Why are you rushing me? Don't you care? It's even better for you if I'm burned. No one to bother you." "No, I care. Come on, Elizabeth." Emily held out her hand and helped Elizabeth out the window. So they both stood there, pressed against the window. As the fire filled the last room, the rescuers had already stretched out a ladder and attached it to the building. It was one flight away from the women, and the rescuers were in a great hurry. Elizabeth was very nervous and didn't notice herself making a wrong move. Her foot slipped, and the woman would have fallen off. But Emily held her hand tightly with her last strength, preventing her from falling. At the risk of their own fall, the rescuers picked up the dangling Elizabeth, picked up Emily, and lowered them down where an ambulance was already waiting. They were both taken to the same hospital, and even placed in a shared room to put in IVs and give medication for smoke poisoning. The nurse put Elizabeth's IV in first, then walked over to Emily's bed. allergies, contraindications, individual intolerance. Emily, are you on any medication? No, I'm pregnant, Emily said quietly. But Elizabeth heard it anyway, got up on the bed and angrily hissed. You bitch. Okay, calm down, the nurse stopped the argument with a commanding voice. I'll send the doctor right away. Tell him about the pregnancy. You need to be checked to see if any of this has harmed the baby. This drip is definitely not going to hurt the baby. All right, lie back. So my husband knocked you up too, Elizabeth hissed as the nurse left. Actually, he'll be my husband soon, in case you've forgotten, Emily retorted coldly. She was tired of this annoying woman with no conscience or even gratitude. If it weren't for her, she'd be scraped off the pavement right now, and certainly not brought to this room. Suddenly, the door opened quietly, and Matthew entered. The first thing he did was run over to Emily's bed. How are you, sweetheart? Are you okay? How's our baby? Is he in any danger? Don't you want to ask about me, you prick? Elizabeth interrupted him. But her ex-husband paid no attention to her until he listened to Emily. Then he kissed his bride tenderly and turned to his common-law wife. Elizabeth, I think you figured it out by now. I love another woman and I'm leaving you. It's hard not to. You lied to my face and had an affair behind my back, she parried. What? You don't want to feel that on your own skin. Do you think I enjoyed having you cheat on me? Matthew, it was one time, I swear. I'm so sorry. I thought you didn't know. Elizabeth, that's enough, he interrupted her. My whole office knew, and I'm aware it was more than once. But it doesn't matter anymore. It's over between us. Why didn't you tell me right away? Why did you have to wait till the last minute? Because it's a boomerang. Elizabeth, do you think my picture with her just happened to catch your eye? No. I wanted you to recognize it that way. I wanted you to see that the whole world knew of your humiliation. I thought you'd realize something about yourself and the way you treated me. But I didn't realize that you wouldn't. Why did you give away our flat? Is that to get back at me too? No, it's the most sensible thing to do. And I've already contacted the police. They'll be here soon to question you. Do you want to put me in jail? Elizabeth is trembling with fear. Matthew, please don't. This has nothing to do with me. I was trying for you and me. You've been trying the wrong way, Elizabeth. You can deal with your own actions. I don't even feel sorry for you anymore, because you planned to hurt the woman and child I love. But I loved you, Matthew, and I still do. When you love, you don't cheat. Matthew kissed Emily, whispered to her that he would be back soon, that he had some business to attend to, and left. The women in the room were silent. Emily had fallen asleep under the influence of the medication, relaxed for the first time since the stress she had endured. Elizabeth frantically tried to think of a way out of the situation. She could say that Matthew had pressured her into looking for money. She could deny it and say that she hadn't taken anything from work, and that a friend had lent her the down payment. Many more schemes were running through her mind when there was a knock and an investigator entered the room. Hello, I've been expecting you. Have you come to find out all about the negligence of the bank employees? Elizabeth began in a quiet voice, trying not to wake Emily. Good afternoon. Actually, I have a lot of questions for you, but we can start here. What do you mean? Someone put blocks on the toilet cubicle door. When was this? That's why I couldn't get out in time. I broke the door down and I saw this madam. Maybe she's the one who set the whole thing up. Why would she do that, do you think? She's sleeping with my husband. That's what everyone in the office will tell you. Everyone knows. She probably wanted to get rid of me that way. Check the cause of the fire, because she could have said it too. The investigator looked at Elizabeth sternly, writing down her statement in his notebook. This is a serious accusation. Do you understand? Yes. I'm telling you the truth. She's very cunning. I'm sure when she wakes up she'll twist and lie to you. But I can tell you everything in order. Yes, please. I went to see my husband at the bank that day. I needed to talk to him about getting our flat back because he got it dishonestly. But on the way I had to go to the toilet. I asked this employee to escort me. And then I couldn't get out. She was laughing through the door, insulting me. And then the fire started. When she and I were standing on the ledge, she kicked me in the leg and I almost fell down. So I'd like to file an attempted murder charge. I wrote it all down. Tell me, what kind of flat fraud were you talking about? My husband got a mortgage by stealing the deposit money from the hotel where I work. If you could elaborate. I was on shift alone that day and I couldn't cope. I called my husband and asked him to come over to stand behind the counter as I had a bad stomach ache. He arrived, I ran off to the loo. When I came back, he was very happy and said something like, "Now we have it for the mortgage." I didn't understand a thing, but in the evening I was told that my client had been robbed. I think it was my husband's doing. Can anyone confirm that your husband actually came to the hotel that day? The cameras can confirm that. We can get my phone records and his work will confirm that he took time off work. And when he came back the same day, he took out a mortgage. Where else would he have got the money? Why didn't you go to the police straight away? I was afraid I'd be punished as an accessory. I also loved my husband and didn't want to give him away. What changed? My conscience got the better of me. I decided to persuade Matthew to sell the flat and give it all back, but he threatened me to keep quiet and stay out of it. So I rang him and told him I'd come to the bank and tell him at his work. And when I got there, you already know what happened. I'm sorry, I had other information. I was on my way to arrest you. I didn't realize it was the exact opposite of what I was told. I need time to verify this information. I'll need you to rest for a while. I'll need you to verify the information. Tomorrow I'll give orders to keep your roommate in the hospital as soon as she regains consciousness, and I'll file a search for your husband. I hope it's not too late and he hasn't fled the country. Have a good day. The investigator left, and Emily opened her eyes, and trying to get used to the hospital lighting, saw that Elizabeth had disconnected the IV and was going somewhere quickly. Elizabeth, where are you going? What's wrong? Who is here? I don't know. Some doctor. He said they're discharging me. You'll have to lie down for a while, so don't come up. Are you running away? Don't be silly. They let me go home. Wait. They couldn't let you go after everything you've done. Emily tried to stand up and restrain the woman. But Elizabeth stepped close to her, clenched her hand into a fist, and swung at her with a warning. Another thing to keep in mind, bitch. I know you're pregnant now, so I know exactly where to hit you. You're going to shut up now and let me walk away, okay? Otherwise, I'm going to beat you so bad I don't know if your baby's going to make it. Do you understand? Emily nodded her head in horror and stopped talking. Elizabeth finished dressing and left the room. She was going to leave the country as soon as possible. First, she'd stop at the hotel, collect all the proceeds, and go straight to the airport. By the time they sorted out who was to blame and who was right, she'd be long gone. What about the job? There's work everywhere. There are hotels in every country. She speaks English well. She'll be fine. And let the investigators get on Matthew and Emily's nerves with their interrogations and subpoenas. Let them have this instead of a holiday and a wedding. Elizabeth's plan was working perfectly. No one at the hotel was surprised to see her. Her partner was glad she could run out for a bite to eat while Elizabeth stood in her place. And when she returned from lunch, neither Elizabeth nor the money was in the register. The woman was traveling in a taxi towards the airport. When she got in and looked at the scoreboard, it turned out that the nearest flight was to Miami. How ironic. After all, this was the very plane she and Matthew were supposed to take on their holiday, and she, Elizabeth, would be on it. A passport was required for the trip, but Elizabeth had made it a long time ago, hoping for a holiday abroad. So the check-in went smoothly, and Elizabeth had no luggage. She went through passport control and was already declaring the amount of money she was going to take with her when a police squad appeared at the airport. Elizabeth was apprehended at the last stage. She almost managed to escape. The theft was reported very quickly by a hotel shift worker. Otherwise, the woman would have been on her way to fulfill her dream instead of traveling to the detention center. On the way, Elizabeth phoned Matthew. "Please come and get me out of here. I'm your wife, Matthew." For all the years we've been together. Help me. Me. Where are you, Elizabeth? What happened? Aren't you in the hospital? I stole money from the hotel and tried to fly away. Will you help me? What did you do? Elizabeth, how can I help you? All I can do is hire a lawyer and bring you some things to give you. I have a key to your rented flat. That's not enough. Matthew, I'm going to jail now. In the course of the investigation, they found footage of Elizabeth throwing a smoke bomb and a receipt from the building shop where she bought it all, and footage from the hotel cameras, where they thought to look at the staircase cameras. They saw that Elizabeth had not taken the lift to her room that day. Matthew was also on the case, first as an accomplice. Then he managed to be treated as a witness, proving that he himself had no intention of enriching himself, but was only aware of his wife's affairs. On the plus side, Matthew came to the police himself, taking the initiative to recover the funds. He was even allowed to see Elizabeth before the trial in the presence of a lawyer. He expected to see his ex-wife confused, depressed, remorseful. But Elizabeth looked defiant, cheerful, and just like before. She cast a burning glance at her ex-husband. Why have you come? Elizabeth, why did you say so many things to the investigator? You realize you'll get a lighter sentence if you plead guilty. You need to confess. My lawyer and I are doing the best we can, but he can't work miracles. Matthew, why do you want to do this? Do you still love me? I will always love you. You're not a stranger to me. You've become like family over the years. You won't leave me? You still love me. That's not what I'm saying. I love you as a human being, and I'll try to help you get your sentence reduced. But to do that, I need you to cooperate with the investigation and admit your guilt first. What are you here for? To get me to confess, so I can go to prison for years, and you can live happily ever after. You're not going to get anywhere, Matthew. You're going to prison with me. You used the stolen money, too. You didn't stop me when you could have, so you're an accessory after the fact. Let's see if your Emily will wait for you. Elizabeth, think of the future. You stole my future when you betrayed me and cheated on me. The next time they saw each other was on the day of the trial, and that was the last time they saw each other. At the trial, Elizabeth stood by her testimony, even though the evidence pointed to the contrary. Part of the jury felt sorry for the woman and believed her. The other part was against it. Elizabeth was sentenced to 4 years in prison with restitution for the property stolen from a hotel customer. The money was returned for her by Matthew when his ex-wife was on her way to prison. The sentence was still fairly lenient considering the multiple charges of theft, damaging bank property, and causing minor injury to Emily, plus administrative fines for false statements. Elizabeth got a good lawyer. That was Matthew's last gift to her. Though Elizabeth didn't appreciate it and thought her ex-husband was a scoundrel trying to get rid of her so he could get married sooner. What Elizabeth did succeed in doing was ruining Matthew and Emily's holiday. They canceled the trip and spent most of the time in the hospital for the pregnancy. The nerves, smoke poisoning, and the fight with Elizabeth did not affect the pregnant woman's health well. But after a course of treatment, everything returned to normal. A week before the wedding, Emily was discharged healthy with an excellent prognosis for the baby. She was met by Matthew, who was exhausted by the worries of the last few days. He gave her a big hug and took her to their new home, which he had rented while he was waiting to be discharged. It was all decked out in flowers. It was the man's way of showing his love. After they got married and had a baby, they moved to another city, closer to the woman's parents. They wanted to protect themselves from the mischief of Elizabeth, who would sooner or later be released from prison. The fear that she might reappear in their lives did not let Emily go for a long time. She often saw her husband's ex-wife in bank offices, on the street, or in a shop. She was afraid that Elizabeth would steal her baby girl or hurt her. All of this developed into an anxiety disorder. Matthew even took Emily to a therapist. After fruitful work with him, the woman was able to forget the past and move on with her life. At least Emily was comforted for the first 4 years by the fact that Elizabeth is behind bars, and when she gets out, will not find them in any way. In prison, Elizabeth got the hang of it quickly. The rules by which they lived there were clear to her. Strike first, lie when it's profitable. Stay alert, Obey the laws of local society. Don't clash. But if a fight broke out, fight. Life in prison seemed bearable to the woman. All the more she entertained herself with thoughts of how she would get out. She made plans about how Matthew would see her and regret his choice, beg for her back. To her, he would leave his Emily, who had bored him for the past 4 years, along with the perpetually screaming child who was not yet Matthew's. Elizabeth had a lot of friends in prison. All the cellmates felt sorry for her. Still, it's a shame to go to prison because of the intrigues of an ex-husband who made a fraud with the mortgage, had a mistress, and then pinned everything on his wife to get rid of her and clear the way to a new happiness. At least that was the story the innocent Elizabeth told them about herself and her imprisonment. Overhearing the conversation between her son and daughter-in-law, Maria Petrovna was numb. She heard such a thing, she gathered. "Albert, we can't go on like this," Linda exclaimed indignantly. "How much longer are we going to be crammed into this tiny room? The baby's coming, and we don't even have a place to put the cot. What can I do?" Albert didn't even turn round, still staring at the monitor. "You know, we can't take out a mortgage, we need money for a down payment. And because of your whims, we can't save up any money. Let's move in with your parents. They have a bigger flat than this one, 2 rooms, but separate. And the kitchen is bigger. Linda. And your mummy will live here alone like a queen. Besides, you know my daddy's very sick. He needs peace and quiet. Besides, he and my mum live in separate rooms. And you're suggesting we put them in the same room? They'd fight all the time. Mummy likes to watch soap operas all day and Daddy hates them. No, I'm not going to let my parents be bullied." "Yeah," Albert nodded. "So you can bully my mum?" He raised his voice. "She already doesn't know where to get away from your eternal discontent. She only comes into the kitchen when you're not home. And she's the landlady, not you." "So live with your mum," Linda cried. "I'll go away. And when the baby is born, I'll raise it myself. And you won't even see it." "Linda, calm down," Albert hugged his wife. "You mustn't worry. I'll think of something. Just be patient." Amelia sat on the sofa in the next room and listened to the conversation between her son and daughter-in-law. "What can you think of?" She sighed heavily. "Albert works all day long as it is. Even on Saturdays he is not at home. His salary is small, he can't afford a flat. I can understand Linda too. She wants to be the boss of her own flat. And here I am, an old woman, disturbing them." She lay down on the sofa and closed her eyes, trying to sleep, but sleep did not come to her. But memories came back to her mind. Amelia had raised Albert alone, without a husband. As it happened, she was unattractive, tall, thin. And she didn't dress fashionably. What man would pay attention to such a thing? She came to the city from the country. She entered a school for painters and plasterers, lived in a dormitory. And after graduation, she got a job in a construction organization, from which she got a small room in a communal flat. She worked on weekends, went to the village, helped her mother to take care of the vegetable garden. Her mother called her back home, but Amelia refused. "I don't want to go back to the village. There's nothing to do here, and it's not interesting," she said. "You can't go back to your parents' house." Her mother chastised her. "You should have looked for a bloke here. You'd get married, and then you'd have kids. But you live in your town like an old woman. You'll end up like an old maid. You're nearly 30 years old, and you've never even had a man, have you?" Amelia resented her mother and promised she wouldn't visit her for a long time after such talk. But on Saturday, she took the bus back to her home village. She had no friends in the city, and those with whom she was friends were married, had children, and were busy with their own worries. The only thing left was to spend all her weekends in the village. And on Monday morning, the first bus back to the city. It was on this bus that she met Nicholas, who was returning from the wedding of an army friend. He helped her carry the heavy bag of potatoes and pickles her mother had packed to the house where she lived, and suggested that they meet the next day. Amelia was hesitant at first, but then agreed. She liked Nicholas for his courtesy and his easy, cheerful disposition. At work all day, she thought about what she would wear on her first date. and decided to wear a dark blue skirt and a white jumper. She didn't have anything else in her wardrobe. "You look like you're dressed for a party meeting," Nicholas joked when he saw Amelia. All right, no offense. It was a joke." "Well, why don't we not go to the cinema, but take a walk in the park?" Amelia suggested. She was afraid to stay with Nicholas in the dark, even in the cinema, which was full of people. "Well, in the park." So in the park, he took her by the hand. "Can I buy you an ice cream?" he asked. When he saw that the girl shook her head negatively, he shrugged again. They walked leisurely along the park alley and talked. Or rather, Nicholas spoke alone, and Amelia listened to him attentively and laughed at his jokes. "Once a young lieutenant was sent to our unit," Nicholas said with a laugh. "As soon as I saw him, I was stunned. It turned out to be Austin. He and I lived in the same house, even went to the same school. Only he was a few years younger. I was in my second year of service, soon to be discharged." So Nicholas lit a cigarette. "I met a girl at that time, even you could say. We had an affair. All my leave was spent with her. And it was a young business. I wanted to see her more often. But you can't go, oh, well, a patrol will stop you at once. Yes, they can put you in the brig, and then you won't be able to see her at all. So that's what I came up with. I started asking Austin for his lieutenant's uniform. Officers' uniforms didn't stop patrols in the city, so they could move around freely. Took me a long time to convince him that countrymen should help each other out, that sort of thing. And I did, because when Austin was on holiday, I'd put on his uniform and go out on the town. I did it once, I did it again. And the third time I came back to the unit, I ran into my own Oliver. How surprised he was to see me wearing my lieutenant's epaulettes. I never went on leave again for the rest of my tour. What did they do to Austin? Did they punish him too? Amelia asked anxiously. No, Nicholas waved his hand. I didn't give him away. He said he'd borrowed the uniform, and from whom I do not know. From Nicholas's story, Amelia learned that he lived in a hostel and worked at the factory as a milling machine operator. He has never been married and has no plans to marry. It's too early for me to have a family, he said, and lit another cigarette. I look at my friends who have already got married. So it's a deadly bore. And if you get a bad wife, it's a disaster. My mate Ashley, he's rushing home after work. I say to him, Ashley, let's have a beer. Take the edge off, and he tells me that if his wife smells alcohol, she'll make a scene, and from his body for a week. And what about the children? Amelia wondered. Don't you want to be a father already? Children? Nicholas grinned. I never wanted to have them. It's a lot of trouble. First you have to get up at night, then take them to daycare, then do homework with them, and how much money is spent on them. And in the end, you don't know what your son or daughter will grow up to be. Our foreman Michael's son went downhill. Got mixed up with a bad crowd. Almost ended up in juvie. What's he got to look forward to? Father's a respectable man, mother's a librarian, and the kid grows up to be a thug. Maybe he lacked parental attention. Amelia suggested. The son has shoes, clothes. What kind of attention is needed? Nicholas objected. Nobody took care of me when I was a kid either. My father died early. My mother worked 2 jobs to feed me and my sister. And nothing. I grew up a decent man. I work, and I send money to my mother. Amelia didn't answer, though she disagreed with Nicholas about family and children. Perhaps he doesn't realize yet that children are a great happiness, she thought. How can one not love them? They walked round the park some more, and Nicholas walked Amelia home. He didn't ask her out again, and Amelia decided that she didn't like Nicholas, and he didn't want to continue hanging out with her anymore. She was surprised to see Nicholas sitting on a bench outside her driveway a few days later on her way home from work. Oh, Amelia was embarrassed, adjusting the dress she'd been wearing that day. I didn't even expect to see you again. Maybe we should go for a walk, Nicholas suggested, getting up from the bench. The weather's so nice. Amelia nodded her head in agreement, and they walked towards the small square. She was very embarrassed by her appearance, but Nicholas didn't seem to mind. He was joking again, talking ironically about his friends, and not asking Amelia about anything. Yes, she had nothing to tell about herself, She lived in the village, studied, now she works. That's all. Would anyone be interested in that? At the entrance, Nicholas suggested that Amelia meet at the weekend and still go to the cinema for an interesting film that had recently been released. Once again, Amelia agreed. She was very pleased that a guy like Nicholas was paying attention to her. So they started dating. And 2 months later, Nicholas stayed in her room for a sleepover. Amelia did not want to invite him to the flat, but he was persistent, saying that he would only have a cup of tea and go to his dormitory. How they ended up in the same bed, Amelia didn't exactly realize. Nicholas's kisses were so sweet that she felt as if she had lost her head. "So I'm your first man?" Nicholas asked in surprise. "I didn't expect it. Why didn't you tell me right away? I would have been more gentle with you." Amelia didn't say anything. She was ashamed. She sat on the bed with her legs tucked under her and the blanket covering her. "Why are you so scared, you silly girl?" Nicholas tried to touch Amelia, but she recoiled. "You should have had your baby a long time ago. And you've been walking around?" He swore foully. "Well, I'm going to go. It's getting late. They might not let me into the dormitory. We're strict about that." After seeing Nicholas off, Amelia went back to her room and couldn't sleep until morning, remembering what had happened between them. "I don't even know what he'll think of me now," Amelia worried. "And he'll refuse to date me, since I'm so easily available." But Nicholas began to visit her 2 or 3 times a week. Sometimes they went to the cinema, but more often Amelia fed him dinner, and then they went to bed, and Nicholas stayed with her all night. "I wish I could marry him," Amelia looked fondly at the sleeping Nicholas. "Why, he's a hard-working bloke, and the fact that he drinks a lot of beer is no big deal. That's why he's a man. And who doesn't drink nowadays?" Amelia closed her eyes and imagined herself in a white wedding dress and long veil. As she and Nicholas walked out of the registry office, he picks her up in his arms and twirls her round and round, and Amelia laughed happily. She rarely visited her mother in the village. "No time. We have a lot of work," Amelia justified. "I've gone to work at the factory. I'll become an apprentice." "True, my room had to be returned, and I had to move to a dormitory. But they say that they give flats to the front runners of production. So I'm trying my best. I want so much to have a separate place where I would be a mistress." "It's time for you to get married. That's what my mother said admonishingly. You are getting on in years. Are you going to stay a maiden?" "I will not." Amelia lowered her eyes. She hadn't told her mother about Nicholas yet, although they had been dating for a year. When they moved into the dormitory, they didn't see each other as often as before. Only when her roommate Jessie worked a different shift or went to her family for the weekend, Nicholas would come to Amelia's house and stay until the morning. But lately he'd been coming less and less often. Amelia waited for him, heating dinner, and then cried into her pillow. One day on her day off, Amelia had breakfast with her roommate Jessie. She had cooked a delicious scrambled egg and was now happily eating it, helping with a slice of bread. Amelia had barely brought her fork to her mouth when she felt dizzy and barely made it to the toilet. "What's the matter with you?" Jessie asked in surprise. "Are you pregnant?" "I'm not." Amelia smiled strangely. "I must have been poisoned yesterday. I bought a pie on the street. I thought it looked suspicious." "Yeah," Jessie grinned. "My mom's been pregnant 5 times and she used to say the same thing. For milk, for pies. You should go to a woman's doctor and get yourself checked out. Don't tell me you've never been with a bloke. I found cigarette butts in my room more than once. So you brought him here while I was away." Amelia blushed up to her ears and skewed her lower lip. "You think it was me? There's no way anyone could have come into the room." Go to the clinic." Jessie continued to insist. "It won't be too late. You can have an abortion before it's too late. What are you going to do with a child now? No flat, no mother to help you." "All right." Amelia nodded her head. "To calm you down, I'll go to the doctor, then we'll laugh together." But there was no laughing. Amelia was indeed pregnant. She came out of the antenatal clinic and didn't know what to do next. Sitting down on a bench, Amelia thought, "We should tell Nicholas everything. As it happens, he has to marry me now. He's not going to give up his own child. She cheered up, got up from the bench, and went home. Waiting until the weekend, when Jeezy was away at her parents' house, Amelia waited for Nicholas to tell him that he was going to be a father. Nicholas was late that day and didn't arrive until the evening drunk. A friend had a son, he told Amelia from the doorstep, so we had a little celebration. He came into the room and sat down on a chair. He already had 2 daughters, but Scott just wanted a son. A son is a son. Nicholas held up his index finger. An heir. What would you do if you knew you were going to have a son soon? Amelia asked cautiously. Nicholas hesitated. The devil knows. He put his foot on his leg. Never thought about it. And if you think about it? Amelia looked at him slyly. Well, I suppose I'd be glad, Nicholas said uncertainly. Why do you ask such questions? Well, then rejoice. Amelia clapped her hands. I'm pregnant, and I'm sure that we'll have a boy. Stop, stop. Nicholas wiped his face with the palm of his hand. Who's having a boy? Me and you. Amelia's joy faded a little. We do. I've already been to the doctor, who confirmed that I'm going to be a mum, and you're going to be a dad. Isn't that great? Now you and I can get married and get our own flat as soon as possible. Married? Nicholas was startled. Why? What do you mean? Amelia was upset. We need our child to have a mom and a dad. Or do you mind? Her eyes filled with tears. I don't mind in principle. Nicholas got up from his chair and started walking toward the door. I'm going to go. I need to think it over. I'll come back tomorrow and we'll talk about it. Okay, Amelia agreed nonchalantly. Tomorrow is tomorrow, but come before lunchtime, because Jay-Z might be back early. But neither tomorrow, nor the day after tomorrow, nor a week later, Nicholas did not come. Desperate, Amelia went to the neighboring factory to look for Nicholas and find out what had happened to him. But she was shocked by the news that Nicholas Morris had been paid and had gone somewhere. Not even his closest mates knew where. Amelia couldn't believe that Nicholas had abandoned her, too. Not just her, but their unborn child. What am I going to do now? She sobbed as she sank into her pillow. What? Jesse grinned. You need an abortion. It's no big deal. You're not the first, you're not the last. I'm not going to kill my baby. Amelia covered her still flat belly with her hands. I'll raise it myself alone, and we don't need no daddy. She buried her head in the pillow again and cried even louder. Yes, it's a mess, sighed Jay-Z. What are you going to tell your mother? I thought you said she was strict. Aha, Amelia exclaimed. I'll have to tell her. She wouldn't kill her own daughter. Besides, she'd just been dreaming of grandchildren. The next weekend, Amelia went to the village. Mrs. Anna shook her head. I haven't heard a word from you for 2 months. Come on, get dressed and go to the garden. You can help dig potatoes. Amelia dug potatoes, but refused to take the buckets full of them into the cellar. What's the matter? Mrs. Anna was angry. The town has spoiled you so much that you can't help your mother. I shouldn't be lifting weights right now. Amelia lowered her eyes. The doctor said not to. Is something wrong? Are you ill? Mrs. Anna looked at her daughter anxiously. What did the doctor say? Mom, I'm pregnant. Amelia, after a moment's silence, blurted out at the top of her lungs and backed away, afraid her mother would hit her with a spade. Yes, said Mrs. Anna. It's a long way off. If there's a hole, there'll be a hole. Who's the father? Do you know him well? Amelia dodged the question. Well, we met. Mrs. Anna rubbed her lower back. Come next weekend. I'll heat the sauna, set the table. Come on. The future son-in-law can butter me up. He can bring me a glass of water in my old age. It's only my child. Amelia lowered her head. I will bring him up alone. Said Mrs. Anna. I've lost my maiden honor and forgotten it. Have you thought how I'll look in people's eyes? They'll say Amelia Robinson's a girl in an interesting position. What a shame. Mrs. Anna was indignant. What do you think I should do? Do what? Amelia took a couple of steps back again. Give birth, of course. I'm not getting rid of the baby, and I don't care if they point the finger at me. What can I do with you now? Mrs. Anna sighed. The girl's not old enough. Maybe a child will brighten your loneliness. In the evening, they sat at the table for a long time, discussing how to live their lives and what would be best for the unborn baby. They decided that Amelia would stay in town so that there would be no cause for rumors in the village. And it was better to give birth there. The doctors were close by. She'll also go to the trade union and push for a separate flat. Like a single mum. Mrs. Anna will sell all the animals, close the house, and move in with her daughter to help with the baby. Amelia will go to work because she has to earn money. There's no one else to help. And Mrs. Ann will look after her grandson and run the household. Just a month before the birth, Amelia moved into a small one-room flat, and soon Mrs. Anna arrived from the village. At the due date, Amelia gave birth to a son, whom she named Albert. When in the maternity hospital she was brought her son for the first time and pressed him to her breast, she immediately realized that this boy was the meaning of her life. 3 months later, Amelia went to work. For some reason, she had no milk, and the pediatrician advised her to switch the boy to formula feeding. Because of this, Amelia was very worried about not being able to feed her son herself. She wanted to give her child the best, so she did not refuse any overtime, sometimes working 2 shifts in a row at the machine. The foreman turned a blind eye to this. For him, the main thing was to fulfill the plan. Mrs. Anna finally settled in the city. Only she wouldn't sell her house in the village. When Albert grows up, she said, we'll go to the village for the whole summer. Let the boy Albert breathe fresh air. 2 years later, the factory gave Amelia a small 2-room flat with a pass-through room and a small kitchen. But Amelia and her mother were happy about it. Albert will go to school, and he'll have his own room, Mrs. Anna said proudly. And you and me, my daughter, will share a room. And if you have to get married, I won't get in your way. I'll go back to the village. No, Amelia shook her head. I'm not going to get married. What if a father who isn't my own starts hurting my little boy? And what do I need a husband for? It's only trouble. After a while, Mrs. Anna suddenly began to complain of pain in her heart, although she had no problems with it before. And her blood pressure was constantly rising. And no medication helped. Doctors helplessly waved their hands and advised to change the climate for a while. After consulting Amelia, Mrs. Anna decided to go to her village for a couple of months to live in peace and quiet, not in the hustle and bustle of the city. Albert was already in kindergarten, and Amelia had to transfer to another shop to work only the day shift. In the village, Mrs. Anna came alive, even managed to make a few beds. In the vegetable garden, carrots and turnips, vitamins for Albert, she said. One morning, a neighbor came to her house, brought a can of steamed milk, and saw Mrs. Anna lying on the floor. The neighbor started calling for help, but it was too late. Mrs. Anna had been dead for a couple of hours. Amelia took a long time to get over her mother's death and blamed herself for letting the sick woman go alone to the village. But life went on. In addition, Albert demanded attention, and Amelia's heartache at losing her mother began to subside a little. Soon she sold her parents' house in the village. With this money, she made some repairs in the flat and renewed the furniture in the room of her son, who was soon to go to the 1st grade. Again, Amelia worked hard. In addition to her main job at the factory, in the evening she washed the entrances to the house. She needed money, which she spent without regret on her son Albert. He had everything he wanted: an expensive football, toys, table hockey. Amelia tried to make sure that the boy, who was growing up without a father, did not need anything. When returning from work, Amelia always went to the shop and bought Albert sweets. She bought fruit for him exclusively at the market, as well as cottage cheese, meat, and fish. There were times when wages were delayed at the factory and there was only money left in her purse for traveling. Even then, Amelia managed to feed her son something tasty, inventing her own recipes and using what she could find in the fridge. She herself might not eat it all these days, or she would wait for what Albert left on his plate. The most important thing for her was that her son never went hungry, She looked at her son fondly when he ate, and she didn't even worry that she would be left without lunch at work tomorrow. She did her best: malnutrition, lack of sleep. She was very tired, working 2 and sometimes 3 jobs. But she never complained because she did it all for the sake of her favorite son, Albert. Albert himself did not cause his mother much trouble. He studied well at school, played sports, and attended an aeromodeling club. Amelia was proud of her son and blushed with embarrassment when he was praised at parents' meetings for participating in sports events or helping to clean up the school grounds. When he was in high school, Albert began to work part-time himself, cleaning entrances to help his mother. He was shy, but he never refused to unload goods in a shop or help someone carry heavy things. He always used the proceeds to buy his mother her favorite Palanca sponge cake, or they would go to an ice cream parlor together and Albert would pay for it himself, proudly taking the money out of his pocket. Amelia was happy to have such an attentive and caring son, telling everyone she knew about him. After graduating from high school, Albert enrolled at the Polytechnic University. He wanted to apply to a construction technical school, but his mother Amelia insisted that he must have a higher education, which no one in their family had ever had. After classes, Albert worked part-time again, either as a loader in a warehouse or as a waiter in a cafe. Amelia now did not clean the entrances, and at the factory she moved to the receiving department, because after a long time working at the machine, her legs were very sore. All in all, they were doing well. The only thing that upset Amelia was that Albert would not introduce her to any girl and did not want to marry her. And Amelia wanted to have grandchildren. "Mum, why should I get married?" he said, laughing. "I'm fine as I am. Who else will take care of me like you? And I have nothing to offer a girl my own flat, no car too. And I don't make much money yet. Not many people would go for that. But you're handsome and clever." Amelia looked at her son with love. "The rest is a matter of time. What do you need a flat for? You can live here. There's plenty of room for everyone. And when I die, you'll be the masters of the whole place." "No, Mum, I don't want to." Albert shook his head. "You and I are good together." After the institute, Albert got a job. From time to time, he met one girl or the other, but he did not start any serious relationships. Everything changed when he met Linda, a tall, blue-eyed beauty with long blonde hair. They met at a birthday party at a mutual friend's house and left together. Albert walked the girl to her house, agreeing that they would see each other again in a few days. Linda was 4 years younger than Albert, had also graduated from university and worked as a marketer in a trading company. She talked interestingly about the country she had traveled to and her work. Linda was so light and cheerful that she literally turned Albert's head. They had already been dating for 6 months, when Albert decided to introduce Linda to his mother. "Mum, I finally met the girl of my dreams and I want you to meet her," he announced one evening. "Oh son, I'm so glad." Amelia splashed her hands. "We must set the table. I'll bake pies with cabbage and potatoes as you like. What is your girlfriend like?" "Linda doesn't eat anything sweet or flowery," Albert grinned. "She's on a diet to keep her figure. So don't cook anything. We'll just have tea. I'll buy a low-fat cake myself." "It's not very human," Amelia shrugged. "A new person comes into the house, and we can't even give them a proper meal." "Don't worry, Mum." Albert put his arm round Amelia's shoulders. "The main thing for me is that you like each other." "I'll like any girl you like, son." Amelia stroked her son's head. "The main thing is that she loves you, and you love her too. I want you to be happy." But no matter what Amelia said, she didn't like Linda. "She's a tricky one," she said to herself as Albert left to walk Linda home. She smiles sweetly, but her eyes are evil. Oh, this new fashion. A slice of cake and a cup of tea, that's all the treat. But it was evident that Albert loved her, and that was important. "I'll get used to her somehow," Amelia decided. "My grandmother used to say a hen pecking at a grain. She keeps the whole yard in her memory." "Mum, what do you think of Linda?" Albert asked excitedly when he got home. "Isn't she beautiful?" "She's beautiful," Amelia agreed, nodding her head. "But she's very thin. What keeps her soul alive? Do you love her?" "Very much." Albert averted his eyes in embarrassment. "And I want her to be my wife. Now it's time for you to marry, Amelia smiled. Well, son, so be it. They decided to have the wedding in 3 months, so that they would have time to prepare for it. Albert told Linda at once that they would live with his mum. You see, Linda, he said, we have no extra money for rented accommodation. We'll have to spend a lot of money on the wedding. And I've already bought the honeymoon vouchers. In the meantime, we'll live with my mum in a separate room, save money for the down payment, and take a mortgage on the flat. My mum's very nice. I think you'll get along with her. Of course, my love, Linda replied gently. You're absolutely right. Why pay money to strangers when you have somewhere to live? We'll be patient for a while, but then we'll move into a bigger and more spacious flat. Linda answered in a way that made Albert like her even more. She had not thought about a future life with her mother-in-law. She knew the saying, patience and hard work will get you through it. The wedding was celebrated in a restaurant. The bride's parents insisted on it. Amelia was uncomfortable. She had never been to such a place. Every now and then she was adjusting the new dress she had bought for the celebration. And when she sat down at the table, she took off her shoes with a small heel, which stung, but were very beautiful and matched the dress. Through tears, she looked at her grown son in his dark blue suit and white flower in his buttonhole. She was proud that she alone had managed to raise such a handsome boy, who might soon become a father himself. And she, Amelia, would have long awaited grandchildren. Linda was also very pretty. In a snow-white long dress, she looked like a porcelain statue. The guests kept shouting. Bitter, the bride and groom rose from their seats and kissed embarrassedly. And I've never had a wedding. And I've never worn a white dress either, Amelia suddenly thought. But she immediately dismissed the thought. What's there to be jealous of? She was angry with herself. You should be happy. My only son is getting married. My pride and support in my old age. The bride's parents said that the wedding should be celebrated in half. We realize, of course, that you're on a tight budget, Miranda said when they met Amelia before the wedding. We're not rich either, but we do value our only children, so we don't have to make a mess of it in front of the guests. Amelia didn't know what rich people were and tried to object. We don't have many guests on our side, no relatives. Albert will invite a few of his mates from school and work. That's all. It doesn't matter, Miranda said. Just be thankful we're not making you buy the bride's outfit. Like we used to? Believe me, it's not cheap. Laura picked out a dress at the salon for. She named the cost of the dress. A price that made Amelia gasp. Well, Miranda continued, we're not going to skimp on our own daughter. A wedding is a once-in-a-lifetime event. Well, maybe 2, she thought. 3 at the most. So we need the bride to be the most beautiful. Amelia withdrew all the money from her book, which wasn't much. She borrowed the rest from acquaintances, which she paid back for a year, limiting herself in many things. She had no money for a present for the young people. She remembered that her mother had given her gold earrings with red stones, so she decided to give them to her daughter-in-law. Linda fiddled with the earrings. She wrinkled her nose, but thanked her mother-in-law and gave the earrings to her mother, who immediately hid them in her purse. Immediately after the wedding, Albert and Linda left for their honeymoon, and Amelia began to organize their room. She washed the window, changed the curtains, and made the bed with new linen. She put a small rug on the floor. Good, she sighed with satisfaction as she looked into the room. When Linda and Albert get back, we'll be a family. Fie, what are those curtains? Linda was outraged when she entered the room. It's like the country. Well, of course they are. Amelia was confused. I bought them a long time ago, but I kept saving them, regretting such a beauty. So the curtains had to come in handy. The room became cozier at once. What's this? Linda saw a rug on the floor. It's very rustic. Do you want to make our room into a rustic hut for Albert and me? Mum, really? Albert supported her. We'll sort it out ourselves. Do as you please, Amelia took offense and left the room. From the open door, she could hear Linda's continued outrage and Albert's affectionate reassurance. In the kitchen, Linda also immediately put her own order. The bottom shelf in the fridge is yours. Put your food there, and we'll put it on the middle and top shelves. We'll eat separately because I'm on a diet. I'm cooking everything low-fat. It's time for Albert to start thinking about his health. Linda brought some nice crockery from her parents, pots and pans, a small frying pan. There was only room for Amelia in one narrow cupboard, 2 pots, a couple of plates, a cup and a few other kitchen utensils. Linda packed everything else into a large bag and took it to the rubbish bin. Why do you keep all this stuff? She was indignant again. Gold-rimmed mugs, 3 plates, bent spoons. Who needs it? My mother brought it from the village, she answered timidly. How could I get rid of it? There are so many beautiful sets for sale. Linda sighed. And you can't get rid of a rustic. Linda continued to tidy up the flat, which had been literally transformed. In her and Albert's room there was a new sofa and a small wardrobe. There were blinds on the windows and a plasma TV on the wall opposite the sofa. In the bathroom, Albert had installed shelves on which stood jars of creams, shampoo and other feminine products that Amelia didn't understand. Son, she asked Albert when Linda wasn't home, did you get a bonus or something? If you bought such a marvelous thing, she pointed to the automatic washing machine. It must be expensive. Mum, Albert laughed. Now you can buy everything on credit. What do you mean? Amelia looked at her son in bewilderment. It's like this: first you buy a thing, and then you pay for it gradually, Albert explained. Everybody lives like that nowadays, and you don't have to save up for years to buy something you need. I'm planning to buy a car that way too, and I'm paying off the TV here, and then I'll take out a new loan. Unless Linda needs a fur coat, he laughed. When do you plan to have children? Amelia asked Albert. Later, Albert said. We want to live for ourselves first, to see the world. And it will be difficult to do that with children. We'll have to spend a lot of money on nappies and nappy covers. Sometimes Linda's friends came to visit. They'd sit in the kitchen for long periods of time, smoking. It gave Amelia a headache and she couldn't sleep all night. But she didn't say anything to her son or daughter-in-law. What are the young ones to do? Old age will come, and you won't want to socialize with anyone. Twice a year, Linda and Albert went on holiday. And then Amelia felt like a full-fledged mistress in the flat. She could sit at the table in the kitchen for long periods of time, watch television, cook leisurely, standing at the cooker. And most importantly, she enjoyed the silence. No one walked back and forth across her room, and she could sleep well at night. When Amelia retired a few years later, it became even more difficult to live in the flat. Linda wasn't working by then either. She had quit her old job and was looking for a new one. But she was in no hurry to get a new job. But she was always reproaching Albert for not earning enough money. Linda slept until lunchtime, during which time Amelia had time to eat breakfast and prepare her own food so that she would not disturb her daughter-in-law in the kitchen. Linda liked to sit at the table for a long time with one foot on the chair, take her time drinking coffee, smoking 1 or 2 cigarettes, and looking out of the window somewhere in the distance. Amelia tried to get out of the house by this time, whatever the weather. Amelia would walk down the street, going into shops to keep warm or to hide from the rain. She would return towards evening when Albert came home from work. She felt more at ease with him. Late at night, when they went to their room and switched on the television, Amelia couldn't sleep well, waking up to any noise, Albert going to the toilet, Linda needing to get a glass of water from the kitchen. When Amelia found out that Linda was pregnant, she was overjoyed. Finally, after 5 years, she would have a grandson or granddaughter. She began to imagine walking down the avenue with a pram, looking at the sleeping baby. But what she heard shattered all her dreams. So I'm not wanted here, she got up from the sofa and walked to the window, where it was already dark. Well, she sighed heavily, they have their own family, and I'll live somehow. How much of that life is left? In the morning, when Albert had gone to work, Amelia took out a checkered notebook from her bedside table, tore out a piece of paper and began to write something. She didn't go out for a walk as usual that day, and didn't mind that an irritated Linda was pacing around the flat and even dropped a stool in the kitchen a few times, kicking it with her foot. In the evening, when Albert came home, Amelia came into the kitchen and sat down across from him. "Son, I need to talk to you," she said. What's wrong, Mum? Albert looked at her anxiously. Is it something serious? You see, son, it's like this. Amelia was silent for a while. I have to go away, probably for a long time. Why? Where to? Albert wondered. I got a letter from Aunt Gwen today. Amelia took a small piece of paper out of her pocket and showed it to Albert, but did not hand it to him. Well, do you remember Aunt Gwen, your grandmother's cousin? How would you remember her? When we went to the village, you were very young. Aunt Gwen says she's ill and needs help, Amelia said quickly, so that her son wouldn't understand. She has no family left and no one to look after her. So Aunt Gwen asked me to look after her, and in return she'll give me the deed to her house. It's a good house. It'll last 100 years. Then you can sell it, add some money, and buy you a flat. Albert stretched out. Well, if you have to, go. But let's leave at the weekend so I can walk you to the bus. No, Amelia waved her hands fearfully. I'll go tomorrow. Aunt Gwen writes to tell me to leave right away. I don't know how long the letter has been traveling. It might be too late. Don't worry. I haven't got much. Why don't Linda at least come with you? Albert offered tentatively. What's the matter, son? She waved her hand again. Linda is in such a state now that she needs to take care of herself. Don't worry, I'll get there myself. How's that? You know, Albert got up from the table. Will you be back in time for the birth of our child? I don't know. Amelia shook her head. I'm not going to guess. I don't know how things will turn out. Maybe I'll live there and stay there for good. So you can use the flat as you see fit, move into the big room. And you can make a nursery in the small one. Well, it's up to you. We'll figure it out. Albert left the kitchen and went into the room, where Linda's joyful voice could be heard. Amelia tore up the letter she had written to herself that morning and threw it in the rubbish bin. Then she went back to her room, opened the wardrobe, and started pulling out her things, putting them into a small traveling bag. Almost 3 years had passed. Albert and Linda's family life was not going well. She reproached her husband for not devoting time to her or their little daughter. Albert replied that he worked 2 jobs so that the family did not need anything, because Linda's needs were growing more and more every day. And it was taking a lot of money for the baby. Over time, Albert realized that he probably didn't really love Linda, but was just fascinated by her beauty and attractiveness. And now it was as if a veil had fallen from his eyes. Linda turned out to be a very scandalous wife. She wanted Albert to help her around the house and earn a lot. He did not refuse to help his wife, coming back from work, bringing groceries. On rare weekends, he cleaned the flat and cooked meals. But he resented the fact that Linda sat all day on the phone, texting with girlfriends or ordering some things through an online shop. She did not do much with her daughter, who fortunately grew up a very quiet child and could play with toys on her own, without causing her mother much trouble. In addition, Albert was very offended at his wife for naming the newborn girl Angelina without consulting him. What kind of name is that? Albert was outraged at the time. I thought we were going to name our daughter Iris or Joyce or maybe Laura. Phew, Linda replied, embarrassed. Iris, Joyce. It's like the countryside, but Angelina. It's trendy and modern. Linda was supported by her mother-in-law. And Albert waved his hand. Call it what you like. Only his father-in-law sided with him. They'll call the girl Oliver laughed, like a cow in an advert. The family was always short of money. Instead of saving a little, Linda ordered cosmetics and clothes she hardly ever wore. The wardrobe was full of her stuff. Those cosmetics were still in her nightstand drawer. Stop wasting money. Albert once told his wife, we'll never save for our own flat. Why do we need a flat? Linda wondered. We're doing fine here for now. When Angelina grows up a little more, we'll exchange this flat for a bigger place. What do you mean? Albert looked at her in confusion. Actually, my mom is also registered here. She's gone to the country for a while. She can come back at any moment. This is already our flat. Linda looked at her husband angrily. Look, she circled the room with her hand. Where are we going to put your mom? And anyway, if she hasn't come here for so many years, she won't come back now. Albert thought about it. He hadn't heard from his mom in 3 years. He had never even visited her in the village. He decided that he would have to go there next weekend to see how she was doing. Maybe she needs some help. But soon Albert forgot about his promise. He got busy at work and had another fight with Linda. Or rather, they fought every night now. He hardly got home, and his mother-in-law was adding fuel to the fire. Other husbands to their wives and buy fur coats. And take to resorts, she said with a complaint son-in-law. And you in life, even a gold ring, cannot give a gift, which she has long dreamed of. So let her find a husband who will provide her with everything. Albert snapped back. Since I'm so bad. And she will nod at the mother-in-law. A beautiful girl like my daughter will never be left alone. She deserves the best. So let her go to the best. Albert couldn't stand it one day when his mother-in-law again reproached him for not earning enough money. I won't cry. Might as well pack my things now and get out of here. That's right. The mother-in-law proudly raised her head and turned to her daughter. Linda, get ready. We're not staying in this flat with this worthless man for another minute. Linda defiantly started to take things out of the wardrobe and put them into a large bag. Albert watched silently. We'll take the baby with us, too. The mother-in-law began to stuff toys into the bag. My dear Angelina, your father is worthless. If he can't provide not only for his wife but also for his child. Take it. Albert shrugged indifferently. Nobody will forbid me to see my daughter anyway. We'll see about that. The mother-in-law grabbed her granddaughter by the hand and pulled her into the hallway. Linda followed them, dragging her bag. Don't forget to leave the keys to the flat, Albert reminded her. Choke on it. Linda took the keys out of her purse and threw them at her husband. You'll be sorry, but it'll be too late. Yeah, Albert nodded and slammed the door behind them. Linda cried in the taxi. Mum, maybe I shouldn't have left Albert. No way, said her mother firmly. Let him suffer. You'll see he'll come to you on his knees and beg for forgiveness. But don't be a fool and forgive him at once. Let him buy you a ring and a mink fur coat, which you have long dreamed of. That's true, Linda wiped her tears. Let him suffer, and I'll think about whether to forgive him or not. Sweet Angelina sat between her grandmother and mother and didn't understand what was happening. She was very sad that they had left her daddy, whom she loved very much. Albert did not show up at her mother-in-law's and father-in-law's flat the next day or a week later. There was also no call from him on his wife's phone. Should I call him myself? Linda asked her mom anxiously. Don't you dare. Miranda looked at her daughter angrily. He'll think you're humiliating yourself in front of him, and he'll stop appreciating you. Let's wait a little longer. Albert, meanwhile, felt almost happy. He missed his daughter, but at the same time he enjoyed his bachelor life. He was happy to come home after work, where no one reproached him or made scandals. Albert also realized that he missed his mother, her gentle voice, her care, her hard and yet soft hands. He lay awake all night remembering how he and his mother had gone to a cafe to eat ice cream, and how they had ridden on a merry-go-round in the park, and his mother had clutched her son's hand tightly out of fear. He remembered her fragrant pancakes, delicious pancakes, his favorite potato pies. The next day Albert took a day off work and went to the railway station. When he reached the village, he got out and looked around confused. He didn't know where to go next. He couldn't remember the house where Aunt Gwen, and now Mum, lived. So he decided to ask the first person he saw for directions. Excuse me, please, he said to the postman, who was just delivering his pension. I need to find a house. Only I don't know the landlady's surname. Her name is Gwen, and my mum Amelia lives with her now. You must know her. You probably bring her a pension too, don't you? I don't remember her, grumbled the postman. There used to be a Mrs. Anna Robinson. She went to the city to see her daughter, and then she came back here and died. Her house has long since been sold. So that's my grandmother. Albert rejoiced. She had a cousin, Aunt Gwen, whom my mother came to look after. Oh, I remember, the postman nodded. You must be talking about Gwen Hopkins. Albert nodded uncertainly. She's been dead about 7 years since she was buried. Who did my mom go to then? Albert looked at the woman, perplexed. I don't know, my dear, I don't know. The postman shrugged his shoulders and threw his bag from one shoulder to the other. I've never seen her. Gwen's house is over there, she pointed to the end of the street, behind the green fence. You'll recognize it. Albert followed the direction and soon found himself standing next to a ramshackle house with a hole in the roof and a rotten porch. Mum, he covered his face with his hands. Where am I going to find you now? He remembered that when his mother had read him the letter, supposedly from Aunt Gwen, her hands had trembled and she had tried not to look at her son, hiding the tears in her eyes. And she had taken very few things with her, and Linda had thrown the rest in the rubbish bin. How could I not have realized that Mum just didn't want to disturb us? Albert slapped his hand on his forehead. She'd spent her whole life trying to make me feel good, and I, the fool, hadn't appreciated it. Back in town, Albert thought about how he could find his mother. The first thing he did was to go to the police and file a missing persons report. They advised him to go to a home for the elderly. Could Amelia be there? So Albert, without delay, went straight to the address. The home for the elderly called Hope was not far from the city. Can you tell me, he said to the pretty woman in uniform who was sitting at the desk, going through some papers, is Amelia Robinson in your care? Robinson, the woman said thoughtfully. Let me see. She began flipping through the lists of residents and shook her head in the negative. No, we don't have her listed. Who does she look like to you? That's my mum. Albert lowered his head. She lied to me when she said she had gone to the village to look after her aunt. I went to the village yesterday. Mum didn't even show up there. Now I don't know where to find her. I had hoped she lived here. He sighed heavily. Alas, my hopes were not fulfilled. So I'll keep looking until I find her. Why did she deceive you? The woman looked at Albert with interest. What did you do? I turned out to be a soulless son. He inclined his head even lower. And now I want to make up for that mistake. Oh, if you knew how many old people live in our house who have been abandoned by their children, the woman sighed. Everyone has a story to tell. Take Mrs. Anna Smith, who was brought to us after being picked up off the street. She'd been wandering round the town for days, sleeping at the railway station. The old woman said she'd lost her memory. She just called herself Anna, but she could not remember her surname or address where she lived, no matter how they questioned her. She didn't have any ID on her. We'd already given her the name Smith, as well as another name. When she was registered with us, we couldn't even find her relatives, the woman continued. We don't know her real name or date of birth. She doesn't even receive a pension. We collected clothes for her, as they say, with the whole world, because she came to us with one small purse, which contained almost nothing, not even documents. When she had a bad cold, she repeated only the name Albert in her delirium. We thought it was her son, who must have kicked his mother out of the house when she lost her memory. Albert suddenly remembered that he had found his mum's passport when he was sorting out his papers. So she didn't take it or forgot to put it in her bag. And the name Anna made me suspicious. That was my grandmother's name. Is this old woman alive? He asked cautiously. Can I see her? Well, the woman rose from her seat. Come on, I'll show her to you. Albert recognized the old woman sitting on the bed as his mother, who had aged and lost even more weight. Mum, he called softly. Amelia flinched and turned round. Albert, my son, she exclaimed, unable to believe her eyes. Mummy, I'm sorry. Albert fell on his knees in front of her and cried. I am so guilty before you. Calm down, my darling. Amelia stroked his head with her wrinkled hand. I knew I would see you again. I believed you'd find me. Mum, come on, let's go home. You're not staying here anymore? Home? Amelia looked at her son confused. But I'll be in the way of everything. I'd rather stay here and you can visit me often. You won't bother anyone, Albert assured her. I live alone. I'm preparing for a divorce. I don't want such a wife. We'll live with you again, just the two of us. And sometimes Angelina will come to visit us. Is that your new fiancé? Amelia looked angrily at her son. "Angelina is my daughter," he laughed. "And your granddaughter, whom you must meet?" Albert asked. "I have a granddaughter?" Amelia was now crying with happiness. Yes, Albert, you do." Amelia fussed. "I'll pack quickly and we'll go home. I don't have much stuff, but I have enough. Thank you to the kind people who gave me everything I need. And thank them for not leaving me to die in the street." When Amelia entered her room, she stopped on the threshold, hesitating to go any further. "Mum, what are you doing?" Albert was surprised. Come in. You're the rightful owner of this place now." "I didn't think I'd ever come back here again," she said, looking round. "Maybe I should go back to the old people's home." Amelia looked anxiously at her son. "Would you make up with Linda and move on with your life? You have a daughter growing up. How will she be without her father?" "I'll see my daughter, but I won't live with Linda anymore," Albert said. "Let's not bring it up again. Come on, I'd better show you your room." He took his mother to the room where Angelina used to live. "Now you'll live here and no one will bother you." "What about you, son?" Amelia got worried. "Will you be uncomfortable in a passageway room? What if I have to go to the loo in the middle of the night? I'll go and wake you up." "You won't?" Albert laughed. "I sleep so soundly that a tank will pass by and I won't hear it. Come on, Mum. Make yourself comfortable. And tomorrow you and I will go to the shop to buy you clothes and anything else you need. I'll cook something. You and I are going to eat. And you're going to tell me how you've lived all these years." Albert was just finishing frying potatoes when his phone rang. Linda appeared on the screen. He wrinkled his nose and didn't answer the call. The phone rang again and again. Albert even had to switch it off so it wouldn't interfere with his communication with his mum. After about an hour, someone rang the doorbell. "Who the hell is that?" Albert grumbled as he clicked the lock. Linda stood on the doorstep. "Why don't you answer my calls and messages?" she asked indignantly. "Do you want me to resent you even more?" She pushed Albert away and walked into the hallway. "If you apologize to me now, then so be it." Linda looked condescendingly at her husband. "I will forgive you, but for the last time. If it happens again, you will never see me again." "I don't want to see you now," Albert replied calmly. "Why did you come here?" Linda noticed her mother-in-law, who came out of her room. "What is that one doing in our flat?" She pointed at Amelia. "That's my mum," Albert frowned. "And now she's going to live here with me. And you don't belong here anymore. Go away." He waved his hand towards the door. "You have nothing to do with this flat." "Then you'll never see our daughter again," Linda used the last argument. "I'll terminate your paternity. We'll talk about it in court." Albert was unfazed. "No one can stop me from having contact with my child, so calm down and leave. I'll file for divorce myself so you don't have to bother." "Albert," Linda suddenly cried, "why don't we try to start over? If you want, we can move in with my parents, or rent a flat. Let your mum live here." "I'm sorry, but I don't love you anymore," Albert shook his head. "And you probably don't love me either. What's the point of having a family like this? Can I at least take the rest of my things?" Her voice trembled with excitement. "I don't mind. Take it," he allowed. "Just hurry up. Mum's tired, and it's time for her to rest." Without saying hello to her mother-in-law, Linda quickly packed everything she needed into bags and went out the door. "Son, maybe you shouldn't do that to Linda?" Amelia asked cautiously. "I don't know what's wrong," said Amelia. "There's no such thing as a husband and wife. They had a fight. They make up." "No, Mum, I can't do that," Albert shook his head. "Remember how Grandma used to say there's heaven in a cage with a sweetheart, so I want to live in love and harmony. And who else but you, Mum, would love me so sincerely and completely unselfishly? You've always loved me more than anyone else in the world. And now I have to take care of you. I'm the happiest man in the world because I have you, Mum." Madison was waiting for her husband to come home from work, cooking dinner. But when she opened the door, she was heartbroken to see ... me for. Madison was in the kitchen cooking dinner. She was enjoying what she called family time. "Madison, when are we having dinner?" Looking into the kitchen, asked Richard, the girl's fiancé. "A couple more minutes and everything will be ready." Madison smiled. "I can't wait," the young man muttered. He sat down at the table and watched the bride's manipulations. "If someone had helped me a little, we would have had dinner a long time ago," Madison jokingly told him. "What are you implying?" Richard was indignant. "Nothing," she stroked the young man's hair. "I was just saying that if you had helped me in the beginning, everything would have been ready long ago." "I'm not just sitting at home, by the way," Richard pouted. "I'm developing a cool program that will cost a lot of money. That's why I don't have time to do housework. And that's the kind of thing a girl should be doing." "I know," honey. Madison kissed her fiancé on the cheek. At that moment, the doorbell rang. "Who the hell is this?" Richard asked in surprise. "You know I don't have the gift of foresight," she joked. But when she met her fiancé's stern gaze, her playful mood disappeared. "I'll get it," Richard said grudgingly and left the table. It so happened that the young man was by nature an introvert, and uninvited guests were like a bone in his throat. When Richard opened the door, he was startled. Standing before him was his cousin Oswald. "Richard, hello," he said loudly, entering the flat uninvited. "Oswald?" Richard asked, confused. "Brother, why are you looking at me like that? It's like seeing a ghost." Oswald laughed. "Or are you not happy to see me?" "Of course I am, but..." Richard tried to collect his thoughts. "What are you doing here?" "I decided to move to the city," shrugged his shoulders. "I'm tired of dealing with my own affairs in the village. I want to find a job here, and then a bride." "I see." Richard scratched his head. At that moment, the landlady came out into the corridor. When she saw the guest, she smiled broadly. "Oswald, what a surprise." Madison hugged the young man. "What are you doing here?" "I decided to move to the city," answered the guest. "Oswald, you're just in time. We were just about to have dinner." The girl invited everyone to the table. The evening passed in a relaxed atmosphere. Even Richard, who was not particularly happy about his brother's arrival, got involved in the conversation. Grandpa Travis had caught up with his cow. Oswald finished his story. "Yes, as long as I can remember, Grandpa Travis always had adventures," Richard said. "On the one hand, I love the country," Madison said dreamily. "What's good about it?" Richard wondered. "There's something romantic about it," she smiled enigmatically. The groom looked at his bride with all his eyes. The young man was a city dweller to the core and never understood the romance of the countryside. Nights under the moon, dew on daisies, evening sunsets near the river. A lot, you know. Madison started listing. "Oof," Richard pointed at his fiancée. "And meanwhile, Madison is right," supported Oswald girl. "You can't find that in the city." "All right, brother, it's late," Richard said gruffly. "Where are you staying?" "I'm nowhere." The guest was confused. "What do you mean?" Richard was taken aback. "I thought I'd stay with you for a while." "I'm looking for a job." Oswald shrugged his shoulders. "So to speak, on a kinship basis." "Brother, in your village you can come to visit and stay overnight for a few days," Richard grinned. "But in the city you have to give advance notice of your arrival." "Where am I supposed to go now?" Oswald asked. He was disappointed by his brother's inhospitality. "Richard, it's late tonight, and Oswald can stay with us," said Madison. "And tomorrow morning we will look for a suitable option for him." "I have one more question for you." Oswald looked at his brother carefully. "When can you pay me back my debt?" "What debt?" The girl was surprised. "I borrowed money from Oswald more than a year ago to develop a program," Richard explained in a disgruntled tone. "What program?" Madison squinted her eyes and stared at her fiancé. "Isn't it the super program you're still writing? Yes?" Richard nodded his head. "I see," Madison said, confused. The girl was discouraged. Richard had initially lied to her, saying that it was a program commissioned by a large company. In fact, it turns out that he borrowed the money from his brother a year ago. Now, there are two questions: where to get the money to pay back the debt and how to live on. The next morning, Richard woke up in a bad mood. The arrival of his brother has disturbed his mental equilibrium. Spoilt relations with his fiancée last night because of Oswald's long tongue. Richard had a fight with Madison. "Tell me, why did you have to lie to me about your super program?" The girl was indignant. "I didn't lie. I just didn't tell the whole truth," Richard justified himself. "How are you going to pay back the debt?" Madison didn't back down. "I'll sell the program and pay it off." "When will you sell it?" "When I write it," Richard snapped. "And if that never happens?" the girl asked. "Thank you very much." The young man bowed to Madison, then grinned and said, "Riley, I always knew you'd be there for me in a time of need." "I'm just realistic about things." The girl looked intently into his eyes. "There is a debt to be repaid." "I'll pay back the money." Richard got angry. "When and why will you pay it back?" "Why are you bothering me?" The young man was indignant. "Because I don't want to start my family life with lies and debts," Madison replied. "Then no one's keeping you," Richard blurted out. "The door is open 24 hours a day. And if you're so mercenary, you're on your own from now on." "About the door, I'll think about your offer, especially since it's my flat," she said in a serious tone. "And about the separate budget, I agree with you completely. From tomorrow, everyone pays for his own food, utilities, and his own wants." Madison got into bed and turned away from her fiancé. "You're welcome," Richard muttered. He was hurt that his fiancé hadn't supported him in his hour of need, but instead had sided with his brother. Memories of last night's quarrel made Richard's mood even worse. Suddenly, a sound from the kitchen alerted the young man. Richard listened. Madison was laughing merrily at Oswald's jokes. This was the last thing he needed. Richard stood up quickly and dressed. "What's going on here?" Richard stood up quickly and dressed. "What's going on here?" Madison, who had been laughing, turned away from her fiancé. She silently collected the rest of the breakfast and put it in the fridge. "Madison, why did you do that?" Oswald wondered. "And to feed Richard breakfast. Why is your brother armless?" Madison asked snidely. "Well, I ran to work, or who will support me?" The girl walked past Richard without even looking at him. A couple of minutes later, the young man heard the sound of a door slamming shut. "Yes, brother, you've caused me a lot of trouble," Richard accused Oswald. "I'm sorry, I didn't know you hadn't told me anything about your fiancé." "About your duty," the young man said. "I'm sorry," Richard mumbled in reply. "Well, that's it," Oswald said, getting up from the table. "I'm off." "Where are you going?" surprised Richard. "Where to? To look for a job? I can't sit on your neck." "All right then," Richard rejoiced. "The sooner Oswald finds a job, the sooner he'll move out. Good luck to you." After breakfast, Richard sat down to write the program. He switched on the computer, but he still couldn't write a single line. The young man's thoughts kept returning to Madison. No doubt he loved his fiancée, but he was hurt by her lack of confidence in his abilities. Toward evening, Madison and Oswald returned home. The girl immediately went into the kitchen to prepare dinner without even looking at Richard. "Why are you two together?" Richard asked unhappily. He was tormented by jealousy. "I met Madison at the entrance and helped her lift the heavy bags," Oswald explained. "By the way, brother, could you pick up your fiancée from work? You would go to the shop together and buy groceries, so that the girl would not carry heavy bags," Oswald suggested. "We'll sort it out ourselves," Richard muttered. "And why are you always meddling in the wrong business?" "I was just trying to help." Oswald waved his hands. "By the way, I have good news. I found a job at a computer firm." "Thank God," Richard rejoiced. "But that's not all," smiled the guest. "I've made a deal for you, so you'll be starting next week too." "As what?" Richard was stunned. "Who's what?" Oswald smiled even wider. Software and hardware engineer. You're a computer scientist by God. Did I ask you to do that? Richard asked angrily. Why do you always meddle where you are not asked? I just wanted to help, Oswald explained. Go you know where with your help? Shouted Richard. I am so sick of you. Get out of my flat and out of my life, so that my eyes do not see you. At Richard's screams, a frightened Madison ran out of the kitchen. What's going on in here? Asked the girl. I found a job for Richard, and he started. Oswald began to explain the situation, but Richard interrupted him. I told you to stay out of my life. The anger inside Richard just tore him apart. Brother, you'd better calm down before you have a stroke, Oswald advised in a calm tone, which made Richard even angrier. Richard wanted to attack his brother with his fists, but he was stopped by Madison's shout. Calm down quickly. The girl clenched her fists in anger. Richard, have you lost your mind? He started at first, Richard complained, pouting his lips. You should thank your brother for taking care of you, Madison shamed her fiancé. And you're throwing your fists at him. Don't mind your own business, she said in a quiet, commanding tone. All right, now we'll all go to dinner, and afterwards we'll talk and discuss everything. I'm not going to sit at the same table with him, Richard said in a cranky tone. You can stay hungry. Madison shrugged indifferently. It's up to you. Richard had no choice but to accept his fiancée's proposal. The conversation at dinner flowed smoothly. The young men were reluctant to utter words, each thinking about his own. After dinner, all three sat down in the living room. Now, Richard, it's up to you, of course. But today we have utility bills to pay, Madison said sternly. Following your suggestion from yesterday, we'll split everything in half. The girl held out the receipts to her fiancé. Familiarize yourself with what we owe for, and how much we owe. All bills must be paid by the 25th, she said. Where will I get the money? Richard was surprised. Your problem. Madison shrugged indifferently. But all payments are due on time. Richard, I'm going to tell you something. Just don't shout, carefully began Oswald. When the young man made sure that his brother listened to him attentively, he continued. What prevents you from combining work and writing a program? Do you think it's easy? Richard was indignant. Not easy, agreed the guest. But with your brains you can do it. At least you believe in me, Richard said with a sneer and looked at his fiancée. Don't look at Madison like a wolf, Oswald advised. Understand she is a young girl, she wants a new dress and lipstick. So let her buy it. Richard shrugged his shoulders. Who forbids her? And with what money did you think? The guest looked at his brother carefully. All her salary goes to your needs. While you're pretending to be a great genius. Richard opened his mouth to object, but didn't make a sound. Damn it, Oswald was right. Madison, why did you put up with me for so long? Richard asked, dumbfounded. Long ago you should have kicked me to speed up, so that I found a job. Because I love you, the girl replied quietly. Richard walked over to the girl and hugged her tightly. Forgive me, please, whispered the young man. My ambition closed my eyes to reality. That's right, Madison said. Tears sprang from her eyes. Has the armor of ambition and arrogance of a great genius cracked? I swear I'll work hard to make sure you have everything you want, Richard vowed and kissed his bride. And I'll see to it. Smiled satisfied Oswald. Happy Madison looked at her guest and whispered, Thank you. 3 months passed. Richard and his brother worked in a computer firm. Oswald moved into a rented flat. Madison and her fiancé's life began to slowly return to normal. One evening after work, the girl waited for her beloved from work. Today she had a surprise for him. Madison was pregnant. The girl was finishing cooking dinner. The doorbell rang. Honey, did you forget your keys? Madison asked, opening the door. But it wasn't her fiancé standing in front of her. Hello, are you Richard's fiancé? asked a beautiful girl and smiled sweetly. Yes, Madison was confused. I need to have a serious talk with you, the guest replied and entered the flat. About what? The thing is, Richard and I are in love. Madison was speechless at what she heard. How is that possible? Did her Richard have another girlfriend? But how could that be? After all, her fiancé, he loved her every day when he came home from work. He never once gave her any reason to doubt his fidelity. Yes, Richard is no angel, but to live on two fronts. Who are you? Madison asked with difficulty. Her throat was sharply dry, and her tongue refused to listen. My name is Chris, the girl replied arrogantly. She looked Madison over from head to toe with an appraising gaze. And I'm Richard's new love. But how can that be? The landlady mumbled in confusion. Her stomach began to ache from the stress she'd been under. But Madison didn't notice it. The only thought in her head was that her fiancé had betrayed her. Why are you surprised? With a cheeky grin, Chris continued to sneer. A man like Richard needs a bright, spectacular, and beautiful woman like me, not someone like you. What's wrong with me? Madison asked quietly. Well, let's just say you're too plain for Richard, Chris replied defiantly. Let's start with your hair. It's a hairstyle that was worn 20 years ago. The color went out of fashion the year before last. The guest shook her head defiantly in defiance. And your clothes are horrible. How can you dislike yourself so much as to stoop to such a thing? Richard never said anything like that. He's always liked everything, the landlady mumbled confusedly. She suddenly realized that she felt a pain in her stomach. She should kick that girl out so Madison could lie down. Once she calms down, her stomach will stop hurting right away. Of course he won't tell you anything, Chris shrugged. You were the most convenient option for him. What are you talking about? Madison, don't be silly, she laughed. You're convenient. You feed the pigeon and put it to bed. What else does a man need to be happy? No, Madison suddenly shouted. You're all lying. Oh, honey, don't be silly. Chris said cynically. You must realize that a man like Richard will sooner or later get tired of living with a bland woman. He'll want exoticism and new emotions. So he switched to me. There was a spark between us as soon as we saw each other. But Richard, as an honest man, for 2 months could not respond to my feelings. But his love for me won out. Shut up, Madison. I know it's unpleasant to hear the truth, but as they say, it's better to know the truth than to live in ignorance. Get out. The pain twisted Madison. It felt like hot metal was being poured into her stomach. What's wrong with you? Chris realized something bad was happening to Madison. The landlady suddenly turned pale and sweat beaded on her face. Call an ambulance. What am I going to tell them? The guest asked in confusion. I'm pregnant. What? Chris looked at her rival in a daze. But Richard didn't tell me anything about the baby. He doesn't know anything yet, Madison said quietly. She slid down the wall and lay on the floor. She couldn't take the pain any longer. An ambulance. I can't lose the baby. Maybe it's for the best? Chris asked thoughtfully. You'll lose the baby, and you and Richard won't have anything to do. What's going on here? Suddenly there was a loud male voice. Through the pain, Madison recognized the voice as Oswald's. I came to talk to her about Richard and me, Chris said. She was talking fast and rambling. Suddenly she felt sick because she was pregnant. Madison, you're pregnant? Oswald interjected. Call an ambulance. Madison asked with all her might and fainted. Madison woke up in the hospital. There was a metal IV stand with a needle inserted into her right arm. The medication was slowly dripping down the tube. Is there anyone here? The girl whispered. Oh, you've come to your senses. An elderly woman who was lying on the next bed came to life. She pressed the nurse call button. A couple of minutes later, a large middle-aged woman entered the room. Despite her fullness, her movements were quick and precise. Tell me, what's wrong with me? Madison asked. Shush, the nurse said with a smile. Tomorrow morning the doctor will come to see you. He will tell you everything. In the meantime, rest." The nurse examined Madison and left the room. After she left, her roommate came over and sat down on a chair next to her. "My name is Mrs. Megan," the woman introduced herself. "What's yours?" "Madison." "What a rare name these days," the neighbor smiled. "You scared the girls last night." "Can you tell me if you know what's wrong with my baby?" quietly asked the girl. "What I don't know, Mrs. Megan waved her hand. "They brought you in last night and put you here. It was awful to look at you. You were covered in IVs and wires." "I see," Madison said. "What a fiancé you have." The older woman smacked her tongue as she thought of Richard. Madison's heart clenched. In spite of everything, she loved that bastard. "Why do you say that?" the girl inquired. "How was he here worried about you?" "You have no idea," Mrs. Megan shook her head. "I was just seeing my son off when they brought you in by ambulance. Your husband wouldn't leave your side until the nurse chased him away. Otherwise, he'd have gone into surgery with you." "The OR?" Madison was dizzy from what she'd just heard. So there was something wrong with her baby if she was in surgery. Maybe that's why the nurse left the bad news to the doctor. "And before I went to bed, I looked out of the window. Your fiancé was sitting on a bench, waiting for someone from the medical staff to come out and tell him what's wrong with you," the old woman continued to tell me without noticing the slim appearance of her new neighbor. "Already close to night, he left. Can you imagine? Why was Richard here all this time? Doesn't he care about me? If he has another woman?" Madison replied, confused. "Yes. And he's been here since this morning," the older woman continued. "Came to check on you." "Are they allowed in here?" "No, but he talked the nurse into it," Mrs. Megan said in a confidential tone. "So she let him in for 5 minutes. When he saw you, he fell to his knees in front of you. 'Forgive me,' says Madison. "Madison, you fool. If I'd known you were having a baby, I never would have done this." "He said that?" The girl was surprised. "Word for word. Here's a cross for you." The old woman crossed herself. "Yes, I believe you," Mrs. Megan. Madison smiled. "What's next?" "He kneels down in front of you, kisses your hand, and cries and cries. And how can he not cry when he's guilty before you?" Mrs. Megan wondered. "Oswald may love you, but what has he done wrong if it's his fault you lost the baby?" "What did you say?" Madison was stunned. "How did I lose the baby?" "Oh, I'm just rambling on. I'm going for a walk." The older woman quickly got up from her chair and left the room. "Mrs. Megan, wait," shouted the girl. But the neighbor didn't even stop. Tears sprang from Madison's eyes. Despite Richard's betrayal, she wanted this child. The girl had dreamed of a child since childhood. At first, she had asked her parents for a brother or sister, but they had stubbornly refused, citing financial difficulties. Madison knew that her parents were lying to her, because their income allowed to give birth and raise at least 2 or even 3 more children. Mom just didn't want to bother with nappies and cradles. She was more satisfied with a quiet life, where she could at any moment pack her things and go on holiday. And her father, who loved his wife madly, indulged her in everything and did not cross her. Then Madison firmly decided that she would have 3 children. And when she found out she was pregnant, she was overjoyed. And now her dream has come crashing down. Suddenly, Madison frowned. Why did Mrs. Megan call Oswald her fiancé? Now there were more questions than answers. The girl waited for her neighbor, but she persistently did not return. At that moment, a nurse came in. She deftly gave Madison an injection. All manipulations of the nurse were accompanied by silence. After a couple of minutes, the girl fell asleep. The next morning, when Madison opened her eyes, the elderly neighbor pretended not to notice the girl. "Mrs. Megan, talk to me, please," the girl asked quietly. But the woman persisted in reading her book. A couple of minutes later, a doctor accompanied by a nurse entered the room. "Hello, Madison. My name is Jonathan. I'm your doctor. How are you feeling?" "Doctor, what's wrong with my baby?" Madison asked her question. "Unfortunately, we couldn't save the fetus." The man shook his head. You were bleeding heavily and we had to save you. There was nothing we could do for your baby." Madison couldn't speak, the lump in her throat preventing her from doing so. "Madison, I realize that what I'm going to say now will not calm you down," the doctor took the girl's hand. "But you're still young. You'll definitely have children in the future. You just need to heal a little now, and everything will be fine." "Promise?" Madison asked hopefully. "I promise," Jonathan answered. After the doctor left, Mrs. Megan sat down next to Madison. "I didn't say those things out of spite," she said peacefully. "It was just something I said without thinking." "Mrs. Megan, you knew from the beginning that I'd lost the baby, didn't you?" the girl said with resentment in her voice. "And you gave me hope to think that it wasn't so bad. I'd been telling myself that I was going to be a mum." "Forgive me, old fool," tears appeared in the woman's eyes. "I wanted to support you, but it didn't work out. You know, I know firsthand what it's like to lose a child." "You do?" Madison asked interestedly. "Yes, after graduating from the Teacher Training Institute, I was sent to a town near Kansas. I felt the happiest because I was on my own. I was finally out of my mother's control. I came to the town, got a job at the school. It was a lot of work, but it didn't scare me. On the contrary, my enthusiasm was bursting. I spent all day at school, organizing the leisure time of the pupils in addition to lessons." Mrs. Megan stopped talking and turned away from the window. Madison was afraid to move so as not to disturb her neighbor's nostalgia. There was a steel mill next to the school. I once had to accompany my students on a field trip to the plant. We were met at the entrance hall by Charles, the honorary metallurgist, who knew the history of the plant like the back of his hand. He led us through the main shop where steel was cooked. The boys were shown the smelting process. You can't imagine the eyes my children looked at it with. Then we were introduced to the best brigade of the plant and its master, Alex. When I saw him, I immediately realized that I was missing his smile drove me crazy. As it turned out later, our feelings were mutual. The old woman smiled at her memories. 6 months later, we got married. The whole town was celebrating our wedding. It seemed there was no happier couple in the whole world. We always did everything together. We cooked dinner together, cleaned, did the laundry. And when I realized I was pregnant, I thought I'd go crazy with happiness. One day my husband didn't meet me after school. At first I thought that he was delayed at work, so I went to the factory gate. The closer I got, the more anxious I became. There were people standing around the gatehouse. I could tell something was wrong. Mrs. Megan stood up, went to the bedside table and poured herself a glass of water. The woman's hands were shaking. It was obvious that it still hurt her to remember those events. She was rambling, but Madison understood her perfectly. As it turned out, there had been an explosion at the factory, and several people had been hurt. And Alex was killed, Mrs. Megan said. "Oh my God," Madison whispered in horror, pressing her palm to her mouth. When I got the news, I blacked out. I woke up in the hospital. That's when my roommate told me all about the explosion at the factory and the dead foreman. The most interesting thing is that she didn't even know that I was the wife of the foreman. You can't imagine the colors in which she described it all. And the cherry on the cake was my child, whom I lost. My neighbor told me about it as if her milk had gone sour in the fridge, in passing, by the way. How I screamed. I was sedated so much that it is impossible to imagine. After I was discharged from the hospital, I immediately wrote a letter of resignation. I packed my things and went back home to my mum. I couldn't live in this town where everything reminded me of my beloved husband and our unborn child. "Mrs. Megan, I'm sorry, I was wrong," Madison said guiltily. "I'm the one who should be apologizing to you," the neighbor said with a pleading tone in her voice. "I acted like that tactless old woman." "I'm so ashamed," Madison whispered. "It wasn't your fault at all. You just wanted what was best for me, so that I wouldn't have to go through the pain that you did." At that moment, a nurse came into the room. "Madison, how are you feeling?" she asked. "I'm fine." "Then go out into the lobby." "Why?" Madison was surprised. "Your fiancé is here to see you." Madison sighed heavily. She had made the decision to break up with Richard. Despite her love for him, she couldn't forgive his betrayal, which had resulted in the loss of her child. Madison slowly stood up and headed for the lobby. It was time to start a new life without lies and deceit. She walked slowly down the corridor, mentally reciting to herself what she had to say to Richard. The only thing that confused her was why her ex-fiancé had come to the hospital to apologize, or, on the contrary, to laugh at her for being such a fool. Going out into the lobby, the girl was dumbfounded. Oswald was standing in front of her. Seeing Madison, the man walked quickly towards her. "Madison, hello," Oswald said. "How are you? How are you feeling? What did the doctors say when you will be discharged?" "Stop," Madison said in an orderly tone. "Not so fast, I don't have time to answer all your questions. I'll start by asking you what you're doing here." "What do you mean?" The young man was taken aback. "I came to check on you. I also brought some fruit." Oswald handed Madison a transparent plastic bag containing oranges and apples. "Thank you," Madison thanked her guest quietly. Take, don't be shy," Oswald smiled. "It's my pleasure to take care of you. I know very well how they feed in hospitals. Besides, you need vitamins now." "That's true," the girl shrugged her shoulders. She nodded her head and pointed to a bench near the window. "Let's go and sit down." "Come on, tell me about it," the young man said, sitting down on the bench next to Madison. "I feel better now," Madison said quietly. "Unfortunately, I lost the baby." The girl was silent. She tried not to cry in front of Oswald. "I know," Oswald lowered his head guiltily. "It was my fault that it happened like that." "Why?" Madison jumped up. "If I hadn't brought Richard into our firm, he wouldn't have met her, and my brother wouldn't have cheated on you." "Oswald, don't blame yourself," Madison took his hand. "It's not your fault. What is to be is not to be avoided. You see, if we're not meant to be with Richard, then so be it." "Do you really think so?" Oswald asked hopefully. "Yes, I believe in signs of fate," Madison confirmed. "So do not worry. Everything that is done, for the best. It's just a shame I lost the baby. I'm getting used to the idea that I'm going to be a mum soon." "Don't worry, honey." The young man took the girl's hands in his. "You will heal and rest a little now, and you will definitely have children in the future." "I hope so," Madison smiled. "Madison, my dear, I've wanted to tell you something for a long time." Oswald looked straight into the girl's eyes. "You don't need Richard. A girl like you deserves more than that." "Oswald, what are you talking about?" Madison asked in a daze. "My darling, my love, you deserve to be loved, carried in his arms," Oswald passionately whispered. "I beg you, forget my foolish brother. Give me a chance to be near you. I love you very much." "Oswald, are you crazy?" Madison tried to pull her hands out of the iron grip of the guest, but he only squeezed them harder, not giving her the opportunity to get free. Suddenly the girl screamed. "You're hurting me." "Darling, I'm sorry, please." The young man, without letting go of her hands, began to kiss them. "Oswald, let me go." But he, as if possessed by an invisible force, did not hear the girl's screams and continued to kiss her hands. Madison began to resist. She hit a bag of fruit that was lying nearby on a bench, causing apples and oranges to scatter on the lobby floor. "What's going on here?" Suddenly, a loud male voice was heard next to them, which sounded like a thunderclap in the silence. Oswald blushed in surprise and let go of Madison with a sudden movement. He looked at the tall, formidable man who had appeared as if out of thin air, eyes wide open. "I came to check on Madison," Oswald said, stammering. "I can see that Jonathan's eyes flashed with lightning. I can also see that the patient doesn't like it. So, young man, your appointment hours are over for today," Jonathan said in a tone that did not tolerate any objections. "But..." Oswald tried to say something to the doctor, but he didn't let him. "Should I call security?" Jonathan asked icily. "I'm leaving," Madison said through gritted teeth. He walked towards the exit, turned round at the door, and said goodbye to the girl. "I'll come and see you tomorrow." "Don't," Madison shouted, but Oswald didn't even turn round. "Yes, Madison, what a fiancé you have. Madison's doctor shook his head in disapproval. Madison looked at Jonathan carefully. Who was he to judge her choice? Oswald is not my fiancé, Madison snapped at him. But this young man thinks otherwise, Jonathan said thoughtfully. I don't care what Oswald thinks. Madison walked past the doctor, heading for the room. He's just my ex-fiancé's cousin. Madison, are you forgetting something? Jonathan shouted after her. What, she asked, turning around. This. The doctor deftly picked up an orange from the floor and threw it to Madison. The girl orientated herself and caught the fruit. I don't need it, Madison smiled and tossed the orange back to Jonathan. No, that's no good, the man said in a jokingly menacing tone. He was about to throw the orange back, but the girl quickly walked over to him and took the fruit. My parents taught me not to throw food around. And you're throwing vitamins, by the way, she scolded the doctor. Madison walked over to the bench where the bag was lying, picked it up and began to pick up the fruit. Jonathan looked at her. Why are you looking at me? She said jokingly. Come on, help me. The man bent down and started picking oranges and apples. The two of them quickly picked up everything that was lying on the floor. When the last orange was left on the floor, Madison and Jonathan reached for it at the same time and their fingers touched. The young men jerked their hands sharply away from the fruit as if they had been electrocuted. Madison looked straight into her doctor's eyes. Suddenly she wanted to disappear into the green pool of Jonathan's eyes, but she quickly averted her gaze so as not to cause more trouble. Madison took the fruit and put it in the bag. Thank you, she said in a quiet voice. You're welcome, the man replied in a husky voice. Now go back to your room. You need to rest. Jonathan turned round and went to his office. Madison stared after him for a long time. What just happened? It must be a surge of hormones after losing a child, she thought. She took the bag of fruit and went to her room. Madison, what took you so long? Mrs. Megan asked. I'm waiting for you. I'm exhausted. Why are you waiting for me? Madison was surprised. Then she handed a bag of fruit to her neighbor. Here's a treat for you. Would you like some company? Oh, thank you. The older woman smiled. Why don't you eat it yourself? Your fiancé brought it for you. You've got it mixed up. It's not my fiancé, it's his brother, the girl corrected her neighbor. What brother? Mrs. Megan was taken aback. I heard him say he was your fiancé when they brought you in. And then he was on his knees in that room begging your forgiveness. Oswald apologized to me for getting Richard a job at the firm where he worked. That's where Richard had an affair with this Chris. Now Oswald blames himself for my losing the baby. Wow, the woman grinned. That's how life sometimes twists and turns. Yeah, Madison agreed. At that moment, a nurse entered the room. Madison, did you have a full house today? The nurse said with a smile. Go. Your fiancé is here to see you again. What fiancé? Mrs. Megan asked, squinting her eyes. Why, do you have lots of them? The nurse asked. No, just one, Madison said. And it was an ex. The girl didn't know what she should do. What if it's Oswald back? The last thing Madison wanted was to see him. What if Richard had a guilty conscience and decided to visit Madison? What's the point of guessing? We'll have to go out and see. Only Madison was a little apprehensive after the ugly scene Oswald had caused today. She didn't want to see him, much less talk to him. Taking a deep breath, Madison walked into the lobby. Richard was standing near the window, looking in. The girl grinned and felt a moment of déjà vu. Exactly an hour ago, she had walked out to Oswald, who was standing looking through that window. Richard, what are you doing here? The girl asked in a harsh tone. What do you mean? Richard was dumbfounded. He walked quickly to the girl and wanted to hug her, but Madison dodged his embrace. Don't. Madison said firmly. I asked you a question. Madison, what's wrong with you? The young man was taken aback. I came to see you. I just got back from a business trip today. I was urgently sent on company business to another city. Oswald was supposed to tell you. Richard, don't make excuses, the girl stood her ground. I know the truth that Chris came to see me, and she told me everything. Told you what? Richard asked in surprise. You're so good at acting, surprised Madison grinned. I can't believe how good you are at acting. Madison, can you explain to me in a human way what happened? Richard asked demandingly. Why did Chris come to see you? She told me the truth about you two being together and in love. There must be some mistake. The young man furrowed his eyebrows. Why is that? Madison grinned. Because she and Oswald have been dating for 2 months now and are in a serious relationship. Madison looked at Richard dumbfounded. She was completely confused as to whether Oswald was in a relationship with Chris. Then why had he confessed his love to her today? Madison looked at Richard carefully. You're not confused about anything, are you? She asked with a frown. Madison, do you think I'm an idiot? The young man was indignant. The thing is that on Thursday, when I was in the hospital, Chris came to my house and told me that you were having an affair with her. She asked me to let you go to her. That doesn't make any sense. Richard sat down on the bench. He looked at Madison carefully. If you didn't know anything about me being in the hospital, how did you end up here? Madison decided to find out the whole truth. I came home and you were gone, the young man explained. I called your phone, but you were off the hook. Yes, because I blocked you, the girl confirmed. Why? Don't play dumb? Madison grinned. But you still haven't answered my question. The girl was determined to get to the truth. How did you know I was in the hospital? I came home, and our beloved neighbor, Mrs. Cassandra, told me in all the colors that you were taken away by ambulance. Do you understand? Okay, Madison said. Honey, tell me what happened to you, Richard asked. Nothing. Except that my fiancé is cheating on me, she blurted out. I lost the baby. Stop. The young man tried to realize the meaning of Madison's words. What baby? Ours. But why didn't you tell me you were pregnant before? I was going to tell you that Thursday when I went into the hospital, Madison grinned. Instead, I found out about your affair. How can you not realize that I'm not having an affair with this Chris? Richard raised his voice. Don't yell at me. Madison was indignant. Your brother, by the way, says otherwise, Madison said. He even apologized. That he introduced you to her. Oswald? The young man mumbled confusedly. But he's lying. I would never cheat on you. Why would he do that? Madison cut the young man's speech short. I don't know. Richard suddenly lost his temper. He walked over to Madison and grabbed her by the shoulders. Look, I'm not guilty of anything. I'm hurt. Madison tried to break free of the young man's iron grip. Let me go. Jonathan walked past the lobby at that moment. He took a quick step toward Richard and pulled him away from Madison. What kind of day is this? The doctor looked indignantly at his patient. Madison, is a hospital a place to get into a relationship? I'm sorry, the girl replied, lowering her head. She was embarrassed that Jonathan had witnessed such an ugly scene. It was the second time in one day. What would he think of her now? Young man, the man said in a firm tone, addressing Richard. I urge you to leave the hospital. Otherwise, I'll be forced to call security. But I've come to visit my fiancé. Ex-fiancé, Madison cut in. Especially ex-fiancé, Jonathan added. Any questions, please, after you've been discharged from the hospital? Your fiancé has lost a child. She needs to regain her strength both physically and mentally. Madison, get me off the blacklist, please, Richard asked. Why? So I can at least call you. Richard, there's no need for that, Madison said tiredly. She was exhausted from the fight with Oswald and Richard. Get your things and get out of my flat. I'm going to the hospital. I don't think we need to hurry, Richard said. I'll wait for you and we'll talk about it. You see, I've already made up my mind, and talking about it isn't going to change anything, Madison said. And you're just delaying the inevitable. I'll wait for you, Richard said. He wanted to kiss Madison goodbye, but she wouldn't let him. "I'll wait for you at home," the young man said and left. Jonathan looked at the girl. "What kind of strange suitors do you have?" The doctor grinned. "I'm shocked." Madison walked slowly into the room. She wanted to lie in bed and cover herself so she wouldn't have to see anyone or anything else today. Madison silently walked into the room and got into bed. Mrs. Megan, try as she might, could not get her neighbor to talk. The older woman took great offense at Madison for not saying anything to her. How was the meeting with the next fiancé thought? But the girl didn't care about her neighbor's feelings. She would have to sort out her own. The girl could not sleep for a long time. She couldn't understand which of the two brothers was lying to her, which of them was pursuing his own advantage, and most importantly, what kind. Madison decided to make a confrontation for all three: Richard, Oswald, and Chris. That this girl has a relationship with one of the brothers, there is no doubt. Just whose side is she playing on? It remains to think of such a situation to catch all three together by surprise. The only place where all the conditions match perfectly is the firm where all three work. All the following days, Madison carefully avoided meeting her brothers, although they regularly came to visit the girl. The last thing she wanted to do was talk to them. Madison realized that her love for Richard was just an obsession. At first, she didn't like his advances. Then she dreamed of his future fame as a famous computer programmer. And then the girl felt sorry for the unrecognized genius, because he had worked so hard to write this super program. And when the truth came out that the program was a figment of Richard's dreams, she felt offended that she had been tricked for so long. As they say, everything is for the best, Madison thought. She spent all her free time at the hospital with Jonathan. At first, the attending physician seemed like a serious man who was only interested in medicine. In fact, Jonathan, as he asked to be called, was only 10 years older than her. His range of interests was so broad that Madison couldn't imagine how she could know so much. They spent days and evenings talking, and each time the subject was different. During this time, she learned a lot of new and useful information. And at the same time, Jonathan was not a connoisseur and did not try to be clever. Unlike her ex-fiancé, who at every opportunity let Madison know that she was stupid. The day of the discharge came. Madison couldn't hide her disappointment. "This is it," she sighed sadly as she walked into her doctor's office. "Why are you sighing so sadly?" Jonathan smiled. "I am being discharged today, and it's time to break up." Madison shrugged. "You sound like you're going to another planet." "Madison, why are you so sad?" The man came up to the girl and put his arm around her. "Are you saying that our relationship is over? Can't we continue it outside the hospital?" "Is that what you want?" Madison asked hopefully. "I do," Jonathan answered. "As soon as I saw you, I knew we had to be together." "You do?" The girl's eyes lit up with happiness. Really, Jonathan kissed her cheek, which made Madison blush. She was pleased with the man's advances. "There was one thing I didn't like." "What's that?" Madison frowned. Their relationship hadn't even begun yet, and already there were complaints. "Madison, please deal with your brothers. I don't want them around you all the time. Plus, I'm confessing my love for you." "Don't worry about that," she exhaled. "I have an idea how to get them out." "Which one do you think is lying?" "I don't know," Madison admitted honestly. "What if Richard is telling the truth? And he hasn't cheated on you?" Jonathan asked with concern in his voice. "Would you go back to him?" "No," Madison answered. "The situation had made it clear to me that I hadn't loved Richard for a long time. It was clear to me that I had treated him like a little child." "Why?" Jonathan wondered. "I felt sorry for him, and I treated him like a piece of paper. He sat on my neck for so long and manipulated me. And I was stupid enough to let him do it because I felt sorry for him. How can it be that Richard works so hard, and his program still doesn't appeal to his customers? As it turned out, it was his idea, and no one ever wanted his software." I see Jonathan pulled her tighter against him. "What are your plans for today?" "I want to get all my stuff home first. Take a shower." Madison rested her head on Jonathan's shoulder. "And then I want to go to that firm where all three of them work." Why? Why? She grinned. I want to catch them in an uncomfortable situation. That way I'll get them out in the open quicker. I won't let you go there alone. Jonathan was determined. I'm coming with you. I'm just finishing my workday for the day. Great. Madison kissed the man. You'll be a great support. I'm going to go pack. I'll be waiting for you downstairs in the car. Jonathan smiled at her. He was glad he had met her. He was glad that he had met her. It so happened that all the girls he had relationships with did not understand his attitude towards work. After all, Jonathan gave himself to it completely, and the girls were capricious, forcing him to choose between work and them. Jonathan had always chosen work, as it was the only thing he saw the meaning of his life in. It was only now, when Madison came along, that he realized what it was to love and be with this girl all the more. Madison understood him and accepted him for who he was, and now he would do anything to make this fragile girl happy. Walking out of the hospital into the street, Madison breathed a full sigh. How she had missed fresh air all this time. Madison, don't stay out in the cool air too long, or you'll catch a cold. Jonathan shouted. He was standing outside his car waiting for the girl. When he saw Madison, the man opened the car door for her. Please, my princess, the carriage is here, he said. Thank you, my king. Madison smiled back. She was pleased with Jonathan's advances, unlike Richard, who never even gave her a hand when she got off the bus. The gallant Jonathan's manners were on point. Where are we going? The man asked as he got into the car. Home first, Madison replied happily. I want to take a quick shower to wash off all the hospital odors. No hard feelings, okay? Even though I love my job so much, every time I come home from the hospital I shower and wash my clothes too. I feel like I smell sick. Then go home now, Jonathan commanded. When they entered their flat, the girl's mood had dropped considerably. It was obvious that Richard had never moved out. She picked up her former young man's traveling bag and quickly threw Richard's things into it. Well, that's it, I guess, said a satisfied Madison as she walked around the flat and looked around. She didn't want any little thing to remind her of their former relationship. Jonathan, I'm going to take a shower. Could you put the kettle on? I'm dying for a sip of green tea. As you say, my princess, the man kissed the girl on the cheek and went to the kitchen. An hour later, the young people headed to the firm where the brothers worked. The girl just couldn't wait to look them both in the eyes, as well as to set things straight. When Madison and Jonathan entered the office where the brothers worked, they saw Oswald kissing Chris. What an interesting picture. Madison grinned. And you, girl, I see that you are not bad. You're having an affair with two brothers at once. Madison, what are you doing here? Oswald was confused. Then he looked at Jonathan, and he was instantly angry. And your protector is here. We've come to set things straight, Jonathan said, explaining his presence. Where's Richard? Madison asked. I don't think we can find out the truth without him. I'm here. Richard walked into the office. I was on a call. Madison, hi. You've been discharged? Yeah, today. Madison held out a bag of her ex-fiance's stuff. Here, this is yours. Did you decide to break up with me after all? Richard sighed sadly. Yes, I realize that you and I are too different, so you and I are no longer on the same path. That's a shame. You're a fool, brother. Oswald grinned wryly. If I were you, I wouldn't let Madison go. I'd fight for her. What's the point? Richard asked indifferently. Believe me, I know that look in Madison's eyes. She's not in love with me anymore. Wait, are you saying Madison is with that right now? Oswald pointed his head at Jonathan. Choose your words, young man, Jonathan warned in a cautionary tone. Or what? Oswald asked defiantly. All right, everybody calm down. Madison looked angrily at those present. Oswald, I want to thank you. For what? Stupefied young man. If it hadn't been for your adventure, I would never have met Jonathan. The girl's eyes lit up with happiness. I would have lived on hopes and promises of a better life. Madison, I can give you an even better one. Oswald began. But he was interrupted by Chris, who screamed hysterically. Honey, what's all this? The girl stomped her foot. First you swore to me in love, saying that you want to marry. And then you actually did? Jesus, Chris, look at yourself, Oswald grinned. I just needed you to come to Madison and introduce yourself as Richard's fiancée. That's all I needed. You used me? Chris squealed. Do you think it's possible to have a serious relationship with someone like you? Oswald grinned. You are only for fun and nothing more. Not like Madison. How is she better than me? Chris looked at her rival with dislike. Everything, Oswald replied. Look at you and her. It is because of women like Madison committed feats. Enough. Madison ordered. I'm not interested in your relations, came out the boss and turned to those present. Oswald, I never want you in my life again. If it weren't for your pregnancy, I would have succeeded, Oswald said angrily. The only thing that would have worked out for you is that Richard and I would have split up, Madison said firmly. But I would never have been with you, that's for sure. I hope that was the last time we see each other. That goes for the three of you. Shall we go? Jonathan asked. He put his arm around Madison's shoulders. Let's go, she smiled at her lover. Suddenly her gaze fell on Richard, who stood like a child abandoned by his mother. He lowered his head and did not know what he should do next. For a moment she felt sorry for her former fiancé, but the girl quickly pulled herself together. After all, Richard was a man who had to become independent. Madison and Jonathan left the office. The girl breathed a sigh of relief. God, I can breathe easy. Madison smiled. Then she kissed Jonathan on the cheek. Where are we going? Let's go to the park and walk, she suggested. That's a great idea. Madison took Jonathan's hand. She was happy to have met him. She saw in him all the qualities of a man she had always dreamed of. In the short time they had known each other, Jonathan had proved himself to be responsible, honest, and wise. He had become a friend to Madison, someone she could confide in. This man would not hesitate to lean on her shoulder in times of need, and he was the only one she was willing to share the family's troubles with.